Chapter 40 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jersey City Frankie. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. Chapter 40. A Stricken Town. We rode on, avoiding the village, which remained dark and silent. The sleeping peasants had either not heard or not heeded the sound and shock of the explosion. When we regained the road on the further side, 2 mounted men awaited us, who, after exchanging a few low-spoken words with the Pavlovs, fell in behind us, and later another and yet another joined us in the same way. It must have been about 1 a.m. when we reached the village halfway between Zizki and Zostrov, where Mishka and I had got the last changes of horses on our journey to the castle. Here again all was dark and quiet, and we rode round instead of through the place. Loris and I, with the Pavlovs, halting at little distance near a small farmhouse, which I remembered as that of the Strasta, while our 4 recruits kept on. Mishka rode up and kicked at the outer gate. A light gleamed in the yard, and the Stroska, yawning and blinking, appeared, holding a lantern and leading a horse. "The horses are ready, that is well, little father," Mishka said approvingly. "They have been ready since midnight, and the samovar also. You will drink a glass of tea, excellencies." As he led out the other 3 horses in turn, a lad brought us steaming glasses of tea, and I was glad of mine anyhow, for the night, though still and clear, was piercingly cold. "The horses will come on with 4 more recruits after a couple of hours' rest," said Loris, as we started again. We kept up an even pace of about 10 miles an hour till we traversed about half the remaining distance, picking up more silent men on little shaggy country horses, till we rode a band of some 15 strong. I think I must have fallen asleep in my saddle when I was startled by a quick exclamation from Loris. "Look, what is yonder?" I looked and saw a ruddy glow in the sky to the northward, a flickering glow, now paling, now flashing up vividly and showing luminous clouds of smoke, the glow of a great fire. "That is over Zizki. It was tonight then, and we are too late." We checked instinctively, and the Pavlovs ranged alongside. We 4, being better mounted, were well ahead, and the others came straggling in our rear. "They were to defend the synagogue. We may still be in time to help," said Pavlov. "True, we 4 must push on. These others must follow as they are able, and tell the rest as they meet them. Give Stepan the word, Mishka," commanded the Duke. Mishka wheeled his horse and rode back, and we pressed forward, increasing the pace to a gallop. Within an hour we had covered 20 versts and were on the outskirts of the town. Every instant that awful glow grew brighter, and when we drew near we saw that half the houses in the Jewish quarter were ablaze, while horrible sounds came to us, the noise of a devil's orgy punctuated irregularly by the crackle of rifle shots. "They are holding the synagogue," Loris said grimly. "Otherwise the firing would be over by this time." The straggling streets that formed this end of the town was quiet and deserted, save for a few scared women and children who were standing in the roadway and who scurried back to their houses at the first sound of our horses' hooves. "Dismount and turn the horses loose," Loris commanded. "We shall find them later, perhaps. If not, well, we shall not." We hurried along on foot, and a minute or 2 later we entered the Jewish quarter, and were in the midst of a hellish scene, lighted luridly by the glare of the burning houses. The road was strewn with battered corpses, some lying in heaps, and burly mojiks, shrieking unsexed viragos, and brutal soldiers maddened with vodka, delirious with the lust of blood and pillage, were sacking the houses that were not yet ablaze, destroying in insensate fury what they were unable to carry off, fighting like demons over their plunder. Here and there were a group of soldiers who, though they were not joining in the work of the destruction, made no effort to check it, but looked on with grim jests. I saw one present his rifle, fire haphazard into the crowd, and yell with devilish mirth as his victim fell, and the confusion increased. His laugh was cut short, for Loris knocked the rifle out of his hand and sternly ordered him back to the barracks, if that was all he could do towards restoring order. The man and his comrades stared stupidly. They did not know who he was, but his uniform and commanding presence had their effect. The ruffian stood at attention, saluted, and asked for orders. "Clear the streets," he commanded sternly. "Drive the people back to their quarter and keep them there, and do it without violence." He stood frowning, revolver in hand, and watched them move off with sheepish alacrity, and began their task, which would not have been an easy one if the soldiers had been under discipline. But there was no discipline. I did not see a single officer in the streets that night. "Are you wise?" Mishka growled unceremoniously as he moved off. I saw now that he and his father were also in uniform, and I surmised that everyone who saw us took the Grand Duke to be an officer in high command, and us members of his staff. We had our revolvers ready, but no one molested us, and as we made our way towards the synagogue, Loris more than once repeated his commands to the idle soldiers with the same success. Brzezinski's inn, where Mishka and I had slept less than a fortnight back, was utterly wrecked, though the fire had not yet reached it, and in a heap in the roadway was the corpse of a woman, clad in a dirty bedgown. Her wig was gone and her skull battered in, but I knew it was the placid, capable, good-tempered landlady herself. The stumps of her hands lay palm down in a pool of blood, all the fingers gone. She had worn rings, poor soul. But that was by no means the most sickening sight I saw on that night of horror. We reached the square where the synagogue stood and found it packed with a frenzied, howling mob who were raging like wolves round the gaunt, weather-worn stone building. There was no more firing, either from within or without. The glass of the two small windows above the doorway, whence, as I learned later, the defenders had delivered the intermittent fusillade that had hitherto kept the mob at bay, was smashed, and the space filled in with hastily fixed barricades. The great door was also doubtless strongly barricaded, since it still withstood an assault with axes and hammers that was in progress. "They shoot no more, they have no more bullets," shrieked a virago in the crowd. "Burn them out, the filthy zits!" Others took up the cry. "Burn them out! What folly to batter the door! Bring straw and wood! Bring them out!" "Keep away! Work around to the left. There will be space soon," growled Mishka, clutching me back, as I began to force my way forward. "Do as I say," he added authoritatively. I guessed he knew best, so I obeyed, and edged round on the outside of the crowd. Something whizzed through the air and fell bang among the crowd, exploding with a deafening report. A babel of yells arose, yells of terror now, and the mob surged back, leaving a clear space in which several stricken figures were writhing, and one lay still. "Fly!" shouted a stentorian voice. "They are making bombs and throwing them! Fly for your lives! Why should we all perish?" I was carried back in the rush and found myself breathless back against a wall. 3 figures cleared themselves from the ruck, and I fought my way to them. "Well done, Mishka, for it was thou!" exclaimed Loris. "How was it done?" "Poof! It was but a toy," grunted Mishka. "I brought it in my pocket. On chance, such things are useful at times. If it had been a real bomb, we should all have entered heaven or hell together." "Get to the steps! They're coming back!" cried Loris. He was right. A section of the crowd turned and made an ugly rush, only to halt in confusion as they found themselves confronted by leveled revolvers held by 4 men in uniform. "Be off!" Loris shouted. There was no anger in his voice. He spoke as sternly and dictatorially as one speaks to a fractious child. "You have done enough mischief for one night, and the punishment is still to come. Back, I say, go home, and see that you do no more evil." He strode towards them, and they gave back before him. "Jesu, it is the Archangel Michael! Ah, but we have sinned indeed!" a woman wailed hysterically. The cry was caught up, echoed in awestruck murmurs, and the whole lot of them quickened their flight as we marched on their heels. "A compliment to you, my Mishka, you and your toy bomb. Somewhat more like Jove and his thunderbolts, though, eh?" said Loris, and I saw his eyes gleam for a moment with a flash of the quaint humor that cropped up in him at the most unexpected moments. "It was a good thought, for it achieved much at very little cost. But these poor fools, when will they learn wisdom?" He stood still, waiting for a brief space to see if the mob would return, but the noise receded. The worst was over, though the baleful glare of the burning houses waxed ever brighter, revealing all the horrors of that stricken town. With a sigh, Loris thrust his revolver back into his belt. None of us had fired a shot, and strode back to the door of the synagogue. From within we could hear now that the din had ceased, the wailing of frightened children, the weeping of women. Loris drew his revolver again and beat on the door with the butt. "Open within there," he cried. "All is safe, and we are friends." "Who are you? Give the name of the word," came the answer in a woman's voice, a voice that I knew well. "Open, Anna! A la vie et la mort," he called. A queer dizziness seized me as I listened. She was within, then. In another minute I should meet her. But how could I hope that she would have a word, a glance to spare for me, when he was there? I could not even feel jealous of him. He was so far above me in every way. For me there must still be only the page's part, while he was the king, and she the queen. There were lumbering noises within, as of heavy goods being moved, but at last the door swung back, and there On the threshold, with her hands outstretched, stood Anne Pendennis. End of chapter 40.
Chapter 41 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. Love or Comradeship. I knew thou wouldst come, she said in French, as he caught those outstretched hands in his. She looked pale and worn, as was natural, but lovelier than ever, as she stood, a shadowy figure in her dark gown, against the gloom behind her, for there was no light within the synagogue. The lurid glare from without shed an unearthly radiance on her white face and shining hair. I am not alone, he said. Maurice Wynn is with me, and the good Mishka and his father. She glanced at me doubtfully, and then held out her hand, flashing at me the ghost of her old arch smile. It is Maurice, indeed. How the beard has changed you, and the uniform. I did not know you, she said, still in French. But come, there is still much to do, and we must be gone before daylight. How did you drive them off? Will they make another attack? She asked, turning to Loris. I think not. They have had enough for one time. You must thank Mishka here for putting them to the rout, he answered. Ah, Stepan, you are here also, as I expected, he added to a young man of about my own age, whom I guessed to be Anne's cousin, Count Vassilitzi, from the strong likeness between them, though his hair was much darker than hers, and he wore a small mustache. What passed in the synagogue both before and after we came, I only learned later, for Mishka and I were posted on guard at the entrance of the square, while Pavlov went off to seek our horses and intercept the men who were following us. If he met them in time, they would make a detour around the town and wait for us to join them on the further side. Our sentry-go business proved an unnecessary precaution, for no more rioters appeared. The excitement in the town was evidently dying out. The pogrom was over for the time. Some of the bolder spirits among the Jews came from the synagogue, exchanging pious ejaculations of thanks to God for their deliverance. They slunk furtively by us. The one venerable-looking old man paused and invoked what sounded like a blessing on us, in Hebrew, I think. You can keep all that for the gracious lady, growled Mishka. It is to her you owe your present deliverance. It is, indeed, he answered in Russian. The God of our fathers will bless her. Yea, and she shall be blessed. And he will bless you, excellencies, you and your seed, even to the third and fourth generation, inasmuch that you have also worked his will, and have delivered his children out of the hands of evildoers. Mishka scratched his head and looked sheepish. This blessing seemed to embarrass him more than any amount of cursing would have done. They are harmless folk, these Jews, he grunted, and they are brave in their way, although they are forever cringing. See, the old man goes with the others to try and check the course of the fires. They are like ants in a disturbed ant's nest. They begin to repair the damage while it is yet being done. Tomorrow, perchance even today, they will resume their business, and will truckle to those who set out to outrage and murder them this night. That is what makes the Jew unconquerable. But it is difficult to teach him to fight, even in defense of his women, though we are doing something in that way among the younger men. They must have done well to hold out so long. How did they get arms? I asked. They have not many so far, but there is one who comes and goes among them, one of themselves, who brings, now a revolver or two, now a handful of cartridges, now a rifle taken to pieces, always at the risk of his life, but that, to him, is less than nothing. Yosef! I exclaimed. He nodded, but said no more, for Count Vassilitzi came across the square to us. All is quiet? He asked. Good. We can do no more, and it is time we were off. You are Monsieur Wynn? I have heard of you from my cousin. We must be friends, monsieur. He held out his hand, and I gripped it. I'd have known him anywhere for Anne's kinsman. He was so like her, more like her in manner, even than in looks. That is, like her when she was in a frivolous mood. There was quite a crowd now on the steps of the synagogue, a crowd of weeping women, yes, and weeping men too, who pressed around Anne, jostling each other in the attempt to kiss her hands or even the hem of her gown. She looked utterly exhausted, and I saw, not without a queer pang at heart, that Loris had his arm around her, was indeed rather carrying her than merely supporting her. "Let us through, good people," I heard him say. "Remember that her peril is as great as yours, even greater." As he spoke, her eyelids drooped, and she swayed back onto his shoulder. He swung her into his arms as I had seen him do once before, on that memorable summer night more than 3 months ago, when I thought I had looked my last on her, and as the woman gave way before him, he strode off, carrying his precious burden as easily as if she had been a little child. We followed closely, revolvers in hand, but there was no need to use them. The few streets we traversed on the route Loris took were deserted, and though the houses on either side were smoldering ruins, we passed but few corpses, and some of those were Russians. The worst of the carnage had been in the streets further from the synagogue. "You came just in time," remarked Vassilitzi. "We were expecting the door to be burst in or burnt every moment, so we packed the women and children up into the women's gallery again. We'd been firing from there till the ammunition was gone, and waited for the end. Most of the Jews were praying hard. Well, I suppose they think their prayers were efficacious for once." "Without doubt," I answered. His cynical tone jarred on me, somehow. "They will need all their prayers," he rejoined, shrugging his shoulders. "Tonight is but a foretaste of what they have to expect. But, perhaps, they will now take the hint, and learn to defend themselves. Also, they will not have the soldiers to reckon with, if they can hold out a little longer." "How's that?" I asked, because he seemed to expect the question, not because I was particularly interested. My mind was concentrated on those two in front. "Why, because the soldiers will be wanted elsewhere, as I think you know very well, mon ami." He laughed. "Well, I for one am glad this little affair is over. I could do with some breakfast, and you also, eh? Anna is worn out. She will never spare herself. Ma foi, she is a marvel. I say that always, and he is another. Now, if I tried to do that sort of thing—" He waved his hand airily towards Loris, tramping steadily along. "But I should not try. She is no light weight, I give you my word. Still, they make a pretty picture, eh? What it is to be a giant!" I'd have liked to shake him and stop his irresponsible chatter, which seemed out of place at the moment. I knew he wouldn't have been able to carry Anne half across the street. He was a little, thin fellow, scarcely as tall as Anne herself. But I could have carried her easily as Loris was doing, if I'd had the chance and the right. Yet his was the right. I knew that well, for I had seen the look in her eyes as she greeted him just now. How could I have been such a conceited fool as to imagine she loved me, even for a moment? What I had dared to hope, to think, was love, was nothing of the kind. Merely frank camaraderie. It was in that spirit she had welcomed me, calling me Maurice, as she had done during the last week or two of her stay at Mary's. But somehow I felt that, though we had met again at last, she was immeasurably removed from me, and the thought was a bitter one. She loved me in a way, yes, as her friend, her good comrade. Well, hadn't I told myself for months past that I must be content with that? End of chapter 41, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 22, 2026. Chapter 42 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Deserted Hunting Lodge. Our own horses were already at the appointed place, together with Pavlov and the Duke's little band of recruits. Sturdy young moujiks these, as I saw now by the grey light of dawn, cleaner and more intelligent looking than most of their class. They were freshly horsed, for they had taken advantage of the confusion in the town to commandeer remounts, as they say in South Africa. There were horses for Anne and her cousin too. Pavlov, like his son, was a man who forgot nothing. Anne had already revived from the faintness that overcame her on the steps of the synagogue. I had heard her talking to Loris as we came along. More than once she declared she was quite able to walk, but he only shook his head and strode on. He set her down now and seemed to be demurring about her horse. I heard her laugh. How well I knew that laugh, though I had already swung myself into the saddle and edged a little away. It is not the first time I have had to ride thus. Look you, Maurice, it goes well enough, does it not? She said, riding towards me. I had to look round at that. She was mounted astride, as I've seen girls ride in the western states. She had slipped off the skirt of her dark riding habit and flung it over her right arm, and was sitting square in her saddle, her long coat reaching to the tops of her high riding boots. I felt a lump come to my throat as I looked at the gallant, graceful figure, at the small proud head with its wealth of bright hair gleaming under the little astrachan cap that she wore, at the white face with its brave smile. I knew well that she was all but dead beat, and that she only laughed lest she might weep or faint again. It goes well indeed, Capitaine, I answered with a military salute. Pavlov, still on foot, came forward and stood beside her, speaking in a low growl. He was an elder edition of his son Mishka. She listened, looking down at him gravely and kindly. I could not take my eyes from her face, so dear and familiar, and yet, in one way, so changed. I guessed wherein the change lay. When I had known her before, she had only been playing a part, posing as a lovely, light-hearted, capriciously coquettish girl, without a real care in the world. But now I saw her without the mask, knew her for what she was, the woman who was devoting her youth, her beauty, her brilliant talents, to a great cause, a well-nigh hopeless one, and I loved her more than ever, with a passionate fervour that, I honestly declared, had no taint of selfishness in it. From that moment I told myself that it was enough for me merely to be near her, to serve her, shield her perhaps, and count, as a rich reward, every chance word or thought or smile she might bestow on me. Yes, it is well. Your duty lies there, I heard her say. God be with you, old friend, and farewell. She slipped her right hand out of its loose leather glove and held it out to him. When I first saw her at Chelsea, I had decided that hers were the most beautiful hands in the world, not small, but exquisitely shaped, hands that, in their graceful movements, somehow seemed to convey a subtle idea of power and versatility. She never wore rings. I remembered how Mary once remarked on this peculiarity, and Anne had answered that she did not care for them. But you've quite a lot in your jewel case. Lovely old ones. You ought to wear them, Anne, Mary protested, and Anne's eyes had darkened as they always did in moments of emotion. They were my mother's. Father gave them me years ago, and I always carried them about with me, but I never wear them, she said quietly. The remembrance of this little episode flashed through my mind as I saw her hold out her ringless hand, begrimed now with dirt and smoke, with a purple mark like a bruise between the thumb and first finger, that showed me she had been one of the firing party. Pavlov bared his shaggy head and bent over the hand as if it had been that of an empress, then moved away and went plump on his knees before Loris. "Where is he going?" I asked Anne, ranging my horse alongside. "Back to his work, like the good man he is," she said, her eyes fixed on Loris, who had raised the old steward and was speaking to him rapidly and affectionately. "He came thus far lest we should have need of him. Perhaps, also, because he would say farewell to me, since we shall not meet again. But now he will return and continue his duty at Sostroff as long as he is permitted to do so. That may not be long, but still his post is there. They will murder him, as some of them tried to murder the Duke last night," I said. "You have heard of the explosion?" She nodded, but made no comment, and, as Pavlov mounted and rode off alone, Loris also mounted and joined us with Vassilitzi, and the four of us started at a hand gallop, a little ahead of the others. Loris rode on Anne's right hand, I on her left, and I noticed, as I glanced at her from time to time, how weary and wistful her face was, when the transient smile had vanished. How wide and sombre the eyes that, as I knew of old, changed with every mood, so that one could never determine their color. At one moment a sparkling hazel, at another, as now, dark and mysterious as the sky on a starless night. The last part of our route lay through thick woods, where the cold light of dawn barely penetrated as yet, though the foliage was thin overhead, and the autumn leaves made a soft carpet on which our horses' hoofs fell almost without a sound. We seemed to move like a troop of shadows through that ghostly twilight. One could imagine it an enchanted forest, like those of our nursery tales, with evil things stirring in the brakes all about us and watching us unseen. Once there came a long-drawn wail from near at hand, and a big wolf, homing to his lair at the dawning, trotted across the track just ahead and bared his fangs in a snarl before he vanished. A few minutes later, another sound rang weirdly above the stealthy whispers of the forest, the scream of some creature in mortal fear and pain. "That is a horse that the wolves are after, or they've got him," exclaimed Vassilitzi. He and I were leading now, for the track was only wide enough for two to ride abreast. We quickened our pace, though we were going at a smart trot, and as a second scream reached our ears, ending abruptly in a queer gurgle, we saw, in front, a shapeless heap, from which two shadowy forms started up growling, but turned tail and vanished, as the other wolf had done, as we galloped towards him. The fallen horse was a shaggy country nag, with a rope bridle and no saddle. The wolves had fastened on his throat, but he was not yet dead, and as I jumped down and stood over him, he made a last convulsive effort to rise, glaring at me piteously with his blood-flecked eyes. We saw then that his foreleg was broken, and I decided the best thing to do was to put the beast out of his misery. So I did it right then with a shot in his ear. "He has been ridden hard. He was just about spent when he stumbled on that fallen trunk, and fell, and that was some time since," said Vassilitzi, looking critically at the quivering, sweat-drenched carcass. "Now, what does it mean? If the wolves had chased him, and they are not so bold now as in the winter, they would have had him down before, and his rider too, but they had only just found him." He stared ahead, and shrugged his shoulders, with the air of a man who dismisses an unimportant question to which he cannot find a ready answer. The others caught up with us as I got into my saddle again, and we made no delay, as the incident was not of sufficient moment. We passed one or two huts that appeared to be uninhabited, and came, at last, to the open, or rather, to a space of a few hundred acres, ringed round by the forest, and saw, in the centre of the clearing, a low, rambling old house of stone, enclosed with a high wall, and near the tall gateway a few scattered wooden huts. Some fowls and pigs were straying about, and a few dejected-looking cows and a couple of horses were grazing near at hand, but there was no sign of human life. "Diable! Where are they all?" exclaimed Vassilitzi, frowning and biting his moustache. "What place is this?" I asked him. "Mine. It was a hunting lodge once. Now it represents all our possessions. But where are the people?" He rode to the nearest hut, kicked open the crazy door, and shouted imperatively. But there was no reply. The whole place was deserted. Thence to the gateway, with its solid oak doors. He jumped down and tried them, petulantly muttering what certainly sounded like a string of oaths. But they were locked and barred. The others rode up, Anne and Loris first, the men straggling after. Anne was swaying in her saddle. Her face was ashy pale. I think she would have fallen, but that Loris steadied her with his arm. "What now?" she gasped. There has been no fighting." She glanced wildly around. "And yet, where are they all? We left 20 to guard her, within, besides these others." She stretched her hand towards the empty huts. "Give the signal," she continued, turning to Dolores. "If there are any within, they will answer that." He drew his revolver and fired 5 shots in the air, while we all sat, staring at him and wondering what would happen next. At least, that was what I was wondering. The silence was so uncanny. End of chapter 42, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 25, 2026.
Chapter 43 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by docdlmartin. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Woman from Siberia. At last there was a movement within. Halting footsteps approached the gates, and a man's voice, hoarse and weak, demanded, "Who is there?" "It is Joseph," Anne exclaimed. "How comes he here alone? Where is my mother, Joseph?" I started as I heard that. Her mother was alive then, though Anne had said she could not remember her, and Treherne had told me she died soon after her arrest, more than 20 years back. "She is within and safe. Natalia is with her," came Joseph's quavering voice as he labored to unbar the gates. We heard him gasping and groaning as if the task was beyond his strength, but he managed it at last. The great doors swung open, and he stood leaning against one of them. In the chill morning light, his face looked gray and drawn, like that of a corpse, just as it had looked that first time I saw him on the staircase at Westminster. On the weed-grown path beside him lay a revolver, as if he had dropped it out of his hand when he started to unbar the gates. "What has happened, Joseph?" Anne asked urgently. "Nothing, all is well, Excellency," he answered. "I rode and gave the order as the order was, and when I reached the town the madness had begun, so I did not enter, but came on hither. My horse was spent, and I found another, but he fell, and I left him and came on foot. I found none here save the Countess and Natalia. The others had fled, fearing an attack. So I closed the gates and kept guard." "God reward thee, friend. Thou hast done well indeed," Anne said, and moved on to the house. I felt a twitch on my sleeve, and Mishka muttered in my ear, "Count our men in, and then see the gate barred. We shall be safer so. I will look after Joseph and find also what food is in the house for us all. We need it sorely." So I sat in my saddle beside the gateway, waiting till the last of our laggards had come in. I saw Loris lift Anne from her horse and support her up the short flight of white stone steps that led up to the house. An elderly peasant woman hurried out to meet them, and behind her appeared a weird, unearthly figure, a tall woman wearing a kind of loose white dressing gown. Her gray hair was flying disheveled about her shoulders, and her face, even seen from a distance, as I saw it now, appeared like some horrible travesty of humanity. The wide open eyes were sightless, covered with a white film. The nose was flattened and distorted, the lips contracted, while the other features, forehead and cheeks and chin, were like a livid, lined mask, grotesquely seamed and scarred. The thing, I could not think of it as a human being at that moment, flung out its hands and shrieked in French, and in a voice that, though shrill with anguish, was piercingly sweet and powerful. "They have come, but they shall never take me again. At least, they shall not take me alive. Anthony, Anthony, where are you, my husband? Save me. Do not let them take me." Anne hurried towards her, but with a scream she turned and sped back into the house, and someone pushed the door to, so I saw no more. But for some minutes those dreadful screams continued. They sounded almost like the shrieks of Joseph's horse when the wolves were on him. The men had all ridden in and were muttering to each other, crossing themselves in superstitious fear. They seemed scared to approach the house, and I believe they'd have stampeded back into the forest if I hadn't slammed the gates and barred them again. "It is not good to be here, Excellency," stammered one. "This place is haunted with ghosts and devils." "Nonsense," I answered roughly. "Brave men you are indeed to be frightened of a poor mad lady who has suffered so cruelly. By judicious bullying, I got them calmed down a bit. A Russian peasant is a difficult person to manage when he's in a superstitious funk." Mishka joined me presently, and we marched our men round to the back of the house and set them foraging for breakfast. Fortunately, there was plenty of food. The place seemed provisioned for a siege. I stood about, watching and directing them. I didn't feel in the least hungry myself, only rather dazed. A hand fell on my shoulder, and I found Loris beside me. "Come and eat and sleep, my friend. We have done well so far. Mishka will take charge here." He looked almost as fresh and alert after that tremendous night we'd had as if he'd just come out of his bedroom at Zostro when we joined him in a big dilapidated dining room where he'd planked some food and a couple of bottles of wine on the great oaken table, though I was as big a scarecrow as Vassilitzi, who was as used up as if he hadn't been to bed for a week. He had dropped his flippant manner and was as cross and irritable as an overtired woman. "Think of these canaille that we feed and clothe and risk our lives for," he exclaimed half hysterically. "We left 20 of them here when Anna and I started for Zitsky yesterday, 20 armed men, and yet at the first rumor of danger they sneak away to the woods and leave their charge that they had sworn to defend, so that we trusted them. And it is these swine and others like them, dastards all, who clamor for what they call freedom and think if they get their vote and their Duma, all will go well. Why should we throw our lives away for such as these? We are all fools together, you and I and Anna, and you," he turned towards me. "You are the biggest fool of us all, for you have not even the excuse is ours. You have no stake in this accursed country and its people. Nom du diable, why do you act as if you had? You are." "Calm yourself, Stepan," Loris interposed. "Go and sleep, we all need that. And as for your cowardly servants, forget all about them. They are worth no more. Go, as I bid you." His level voice, his authoritative manner had their effect, and Vassilitzi lurched away. He wasn't really drunk, but when a man is famished and dead tired, 2 or 3 glasses of wine will have an immense effect on him, though 1 glass will serve to pull him together, as it did me, to a certain extent anyhow. I was able to ask Loris about that horrible apparition I had seen. "Yes, she is the Countess Anna Pendennis, or all that remains of her," he answered sternly and sadly. "You have only seen her at a distance, but that was sufficient to show you what Siberia may mean to a delicately nurtured woman. if she had only died, as was given out. But she did not die. She worked as a slave, in the prison in winter, in the fields in summer. She had frostbite. It destroyed her sight, her face. It made her a horror to look upon. Yet still she did not die, perhaps because her mind was gone, and strength lingers in mad creatures. Joseph told all this. He was her fellow prisoner, and he made his escape too. No, 3 years or more since. He made his way here, and Anna was good to him, as she is good to every creature in adversity. Until then, she had always believed that her mother died at her birth, but when she learned the truth, she would have moved heaven and earth to deliver her. It was accomplished at last. The Tsar was induced to sign an order for the release of this mad and maimed woman. Just when all hope seemed lost, the deliverance came, and the wreck that remains of the Countess Anna Pendennis was brought here less than 3 months ago, and he broke off as the woman servant Joseph had spoken of as Natalia hurried into the room and unceremoniously beckoned him out. He rose at once and followed her, but turned at the door. "Get some sleep while you can," he said, nodding towards a great couch covered with a bearskin rug. "None will disturb you here for a few hours, and we shall have either to fight or to travel again ere long." I sat for a minute or two, trying to think over the long tragedy that he had summed up in so few words, and wondering where Anthony Pendennis was. Surely he should have been here with his wife and daughter, and yet no one had mentioned him, and I had had no opportunity of asking about him. Had, in fact, forgotten his very existence till these last few minutes. But consecutive thought was impossible, and I gave up the attempt as I stumbled to the couch and fell fast asleep. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44 of the Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by docdlmartin. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. At Vassilitzi's. Into my dreams came voices that I knew, speaking in French, in low tones which yet reached my ears distinctly. "I think we should tell him. It is not right or just to keep him in ignorance." No, we must not tell him. We must not," Anne said softly but vehemently. "We shall need him so sorely. There are so very few whom we can really trust. Besides, why should we tell him? It would break his heart, for remember, we do not know." They were not dream voices, but real ones, and as I found that out, I felt I'd better let the speakers, Anne and Loris, know I was awake, for I'd no wish to overhear what they were saying, especially as I had a queer intuition that they were talking of me. So I sat up under the fur rug someone had thrown over me, and began to stammer out an apology in English. The room was almost dark, and through the window, with its heavy stone frame, I saw the last glow of a stormy sunset. Anne and Laura stood there, looking out, and as I moved and spoke, she broke off her sentence and came towards me. "You have slept long, Maurice. That is well," she said, also in English, with the pretty, deliberate accent I had always thought so charming. "There is no need for apologies. We should have roused you if necessary, but all is quiet so far. Will you come to my boudoir presently? I will give you tea there. We have scarcely had one word together as yet, and there is so much to say. I will send lights now, Some of the servants have returned and will get you all you need." Loris opened the door for her and crossed back to his former post by the window while I scrambled up as a scared-looking, shamefaced manservant entered with a lamp and slunk out again. "Those wretches, they deserve the knout," Loris said grimly when we were alone. They were all well armed, and yet, at the first hint of danger, they took themselves into hiding, leaving those two women defenseless here. Well, they will have to take care of themselves in future, the curs. "The Countess is dead," he added abruptly. "Dead!" I exclaimed. Yes, always, even in her madness, she remembered all she had suffered, and her terror of being arrested again killed her. It is God's mercy for her that she is at peace, and for us too, for we could not have taken her with us, nor have left her in charge of Natalia and these hounds, as we had intended. We shall bury her out in the courtyard yonder. It is the only way, and later, if nothing prevents, we start for the railroad." "Where is Pendennis?" I asked. "Is he not here?" "No, he may join us later, I cannot say," he answered, staring out of the window. I felt that he was embarrassed in some way, that there was something he wished to say, but hesitated at saying it. That wasn't a bit like him, for he had always been the personification of frankness. "I wonder if there's a bath to be had in the house," I said inanely, looking at my grimy hands. "Yes, in Vassilitzi's dressing room. The servant will take you up," he answered abstractly, and as I moved toward the wide old-fashioned bell-pull by the stove, he turned and strode after me. "Wait one moment," he said hurriedly. "Are you still determined to go through with us? There is still time to turn back, or rather to go back to England. It would not be easy, perhaps, but it would be quite possible for you to get through via Warsaw and Alexandrovo if you go at once." "Why do you ask me that?" looking at him very straight. His blue eyes were more troubled than I had ever seen them. "Do you doubt me?" "No, before God I trust you as I trust none other in the world but Mishka and his father. But you are a stranger, a foreigner. Why should you throw your life away for us?" "I have told you why before. Because I only value my life so far as it may be of service to her. If I left her and you, now, as you suggest, smuggled myself back into safety, man, it's not to be thought of. Well, I will urge you no more," he said sadly, "but you are sacrificing yourself for a chivalrous delusion, my friend." "Where's the delusion? I know she does not love me, and I am quite content." Long after, I knew what he had wished to tell me then, and I can't even now decide what I'd have done if he had spoken, whether I would have gone or stayed, but I think I'd have stayed. When I had bathed and dressed in Vassilitzi's dressing room, he was still in bed and asleep in the adjoining one. A servant took me to Anne's boudoir, a small bare room that yet had a cozy, home-like look about it. She was alone, sitting in a low chair, her hands lying listlessly on the lap of her black gown. Her face was even whiter and more weary than it had looked in the morning, and she had been weeping, I saw, for her long lashes were still wet. But she summoned up a smile for me, that brave smile that was, in a way, sadder and more moving than tears. "You have heard that my mother is dead?" she asked in a low voice. "She died in my arms half an hour after we got in, and I am glad, so glad. I have been thanking God in my heart ever since. She never knew me. She knew none of us but Joseph, and that only because he had been near her in that dreadful place. You saw her just for a moment. You saw something of what those long years had made of her, and we, my God, we had thought her dead all that time." She shuddered and sat staring with stern, somber eyes at the fire, her slender fingers convulsively interlaced. She was silent for a space, and so was I, for I could find never a word to say. Suddenly she looked straight at me. "Maurice Wynn, if ever the time comes when you might blame me, condemn me, justifiably enough, think of my mother's history. Remember that I was brought up with one fixed purpose in life, to avenge her, even when I only thought her dead. How much more should that vengeance be now that I know that all that she had to suffer? And she is only one among thousands who have suffered, who are suffering as much. Yes, and more. There is but one way to crush, to destroy the power that has done, that is doing these deeds. It will not be done in our time, but we are at least preparing the way. Within a few days we shall have gone some distance along it, with a rush, towards our goal. I tell you that to further this work I will do anything. Sacrifice even those who are dearer to me than my own soul. Therefore, as I said, remember that when you condemn me for aught I have done or shall do. I can never condemn you, Anne. You know that well. The Queen can do no wrong." The fire that had flashed into her eyes faded, dimmed, I thought, by a mist of tears. "You are indeed a true knight, Maurice Wynn," she said wistfully. "I do not deserve such devotion. No, don't interrupt me. I know well what I am saying, and perhaps you also will know some day. I have deceived you in many ways. You know that well enough." "As I now know your purpose," I answered. "But why didn't you trust me at first, Anne, when we were in London? Don't think I'm blaming you. I'm not, really. But surely you must have known, even then, that you might have trusted me. Yes, and Mary too." She was not looking at me now, but at the fire, and she paused before she answered slowly. "It was not because I did not trust you and her, but I did not wish to involve either of you in my fortunes. You have involved yourself in them, my poor foolish friend. But have you told her anything?" "No, she does not even know that I am back in Russia, and before I returned I told her nothing." "She thinks me dead?" "She did not know what to think, and she fretted terribly at your silence." "Poor Mary," she said, with a queer little pathetic smile. "Well, perhaps her mind is at rest by this time." "You have written to her?" "No, but she has news by this time." "And your father?" I asked. She shook her head. "You must ask me nothing of him. Perhaps you will learn all there is to know one day, how strangely your fate has been linked with mine. Think of Joseph meeting you that night. He had heard of my danger from the League. Ah, that traitor, Selinsky! How much his miserable soul had to answer for, and he did not know whom to trust, so he set out himself, though he speaks no word of any language but his own, and bribed and begged his way to London. He found out some of the League there, at a place in Soho, learned there where Selinsky lived, stole the key to his rooms, and met you. He is a marvel, the poor good Joseph." "Did you know it was he when I described him that night?" I asked impulsively. She looked up quickly. "I have told you I did not wish to entangle you in my affairs, and The door opened, and her cousin entered. End of chapter 44.
Chapter 45 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Campaign at Warsaw. A few hours later, we were on the road once more. Anne and Natalia in a traveling carriage, the rest of us mounted. The old servant was sobbing hysterically as she followed her mistress down the steps, but Anne's white face was tearless, though she turned it for a moment with a yearning farewell glance towards the fresh-made mound in the courtyard, the grave where we had laid the corpse of her mother, and the coffin which Mishka and some of the men had made during the day. That hurried funeral was as impressive as any I've ever been at, though there was no service, for it would have been impossible to summon a priest in time. Besides, I doubt if they'd have got an Orthodox Russian priest to come. The Vassilitzis for Roman Catholics, as so many of the old Polish nobility are. In dead silence, the four of us, Loris and Stepan, Mishka and I, carried the coffin down, wrapped in an old curtain of rich brocade, and stood by with bowed heads, while still in silence it was lowered down, pall and all. As we turned away, I saw a face at one of the windows, and knew Anne had watched us at our task. Her self-control, her powers of endurance, were marvelous. I do not believe she had slept all that day, and yet, when the carriage was ready, she came out with a steady step, and I heard her speak soothingly to the weeping Natalia. That was the last I saw or heard of her for several days, for it had been arranged, and she should drive to Prushan, escorted only by Loris and her cousin and a couple of our men, and travel thence by train to Warsaw, while Mishka and I with the others would ride the whole way. It meant a couple of days delayed in reaching Warsaw, but it seemed the safest plan, and it worked without a hitch. By twos and threes we rode into Warsaw in the early morning of the day that saw the beginning of the great strike, and of the revolution which will end only when the Russian Empire becomes a free public, and God only knows when that will come to pass. I have been through 3 regular campaigns in different parts of the world during the last 10 years, and had a good many thrilling experiences, one way and another, but weeks I spent in Warsaw in the late fall of the year 1905 were the strangest and most eventful I've ever gone through. As I look back now, the whole thing seems like a long and vivid nightmare, of which some few incidents stand out with dreadful distinctness, and the rest is a mere blur, a confusion of shifting figures and scenes, of noise and dust and bloodshed, strenuous days of street rioting and fighting, in which one and all of us did our share, and when the row was over for the time being, turned our hands to ambulance work, nights that were even more strenuous than the days, for in the night the next day's plan had to be decided on, funds and food given out, the circulars reporting progress and urging the people to stand fast to be drawn up, printed and issued. Such publications were prohibited, of course, but Warsaw, like most of the other cities, was strewn with them. People read them, flaunting them openly before the eyes of the authorities, and though the police and the soldiers tried the plan of bayoneting or shooting at sight every one whom they saw with the revolutionary print, they soon had to reserve it for any defenseless woman or even child whom they might encounter. For the great majority of the strikers were armed, and they showed themselves even quicker with their revolvers and killers than the soldiers were with their rifles, while every soldier killed represented one more rifle seized. We reported ourselves on arrival as arranged, at a spacious old house in a narrow street near the university, which thenceforth became our headquarters, and within a few hours a kind of hospital also, for there were soon many wounded to be cared for. Anne organized a band of women as amateur nurses, with Natalia at the head of them in our house, while others were on duty elsewhere. This quarter, as I found, was a stronghold of the League, and many houses were, like ours, turned into temporary hospitals. But I gathered that comparatively few of Anne's most influential colleagues were in sympathy with her efforts to mitigate the horrors that surrounded us. In that way, we, her own chosen band, worked almost alone. Most of the revolutionists were as callous, as brutal as the Cossacks themselves, women as well as men. They would march in procession, waving banners and singing patriotic songs, and, when the inevitable collision with the soldiers came, they would fight like furies, and die with a laugh of defiance on their lips. But those who came through unscathed had neither care nor sympathy to bestow on the fallen. I joined your band of nurses, a handsome, vivacious little woman, evidently one of her own rank, said to Anne one day, with a scornful laugh, "I'm no good at such work. Give me real work to do, a bomb to throw, a revolver to fire. I have that at least." She touched her fur blouse significantly. "I want to fight, to kill. And if I am killed instead, well, it is but the fortune of war. But nursing, bah! I have not the patience. You are far too tender-hearted, Anna Petrovna. You ought to have been a nun. But what would our handsome Loris have done then? Oh, it is all right, ma chère. I am quite discreet. But do you suppose I have not recognized him?" Anne looked troubled. "And others, do they recognize him?" she asked quietly. "Who knows? We are too busy these days to think or care who any one is or is not. Besides, he is supposed to be dead. It was cleverly planned, that bomb affair. Was it your doing, Anna? He is too stupidly honest to have thought of it himself. There, do not look so vexed. You have no fear that I shall denounce him. He is far too good-looking. You have a penchant for good-looking men," she added, with an audacious glance in my direction. It happened for once that Anne and I were alone together, until Madame Levinska turned up, in the room that was used as an office and where, between whiles, I did a good bit of secretarial work. That small, untidy room represented the bureau from which the whole of this section of the League was controlled, practically by that slender, pale-faced girl in the black gown, who sat gravely regarding her frivolous acquaintance. Her grasp of affairs was so marvelous as her personal courage in time of need. She was at once the head and the heart of the whole organization. I felt angry with the Levinska woman for her taunt. She, and such as she, who were like so many undisciplined children, and whose ideas of revolution were practically limited to acts of violence, committed in defiance or reprisal, could not even begin to understand the ideals not merely held, but maintained by Anne and Loris, and the few others who, with them, knew that permanent good could never be accomplished by evil means. Those two were dreamers, dreaming greatly. Theirs was the vision splendid, though they saw it only from far off, and strove courageously but unavailingly to draw near to it. That vision will some day become a reality, and then, I wonder if any remembrance of those who saw it first and paved the way to its realization will linger, save in the minds of the few who knew and loved and worked beside them, but who were not permitted to share their fate. I doubt it, for the world at large has a short memory. Anne made no comment on Madame Levinska's last remark. While I kept on with my work, I wished the woman would go, for we had much to get through this afternoon, and at any moment some serious interruption might occur, or the news we're awaiting might come. The streets were unusually quiet today, hereabouts at any rate, and a few timid folk who had kept within doors of late had again ventured out. On the previous day, several big meetings had been held, almost without opposition, for although martial law was proclaimed and thousands of soldiers had entered the city to repress disturbances, many of the troops, including a whole regiment of hussars from Grodno, had refused to fire on the people. Since then there was a decided abatement of hostilities, though one dared not hope that it meant more than a mere lull in the storm. The railway and telegraph strikes were maintained, but plenty of news got through. News that the revolution was general, that Kronstadt and Riga were in flames, Petersburg and Moscow in a state of anarchy, that many of the troops had mutinied and were fighting on the side of the revolutionists, while the rest were disheartened and tired out. During the last few hours persistent rumors had reached us that the Tsar was on the point of issuing a manifesto granting civil and political liberty to the people, a capitulation on all important points in fact. If the news were true, it was magnificent. Such of us who were optimists believed it would be the beginning of a new and glorious era. Already we had disseminated such information as had reached us, by issuing broadcast small news sheets damp from the secret printing press in the cellar of the old house. A week or two ago that press would have had to be shifted to a fresh hiding place every night, but in these days the police had no time for making systematic inquisitions. It was all they could do to hold their own openly against the mob, and now we were waiting for fresh and more definite tidings. And I know Anne's heart beat high with hope, though we had not exchanged a dozen words before Madame Levinska made her unwelcome appearance, and Anne, who had but just returned to the room after going the round of our amateur hospital, tackled her about the nursing. She stayed for a few minutes longer, continuing her irresponsible chatter, and then, to my relief anyhow, took herself off, announcing airily that she was going to see if there was any fun stirring. "Do not be reckless, Marie," Anne called after her. "You do no good by that, and may do much harm." "Have no fear for me, little nun," she retorted gaily over her shoulder. "I can take care of myself. She cares only for the excitement, the poor Marie," I heard Anne murmur with a sigh as she crossed to the window and watched her friend's retreating figure. A jaunty, audacious little figure it was. There was a clatter and jingle below, and 3 or 4 Cossacks cantered along, One of them called out something to Madame Levinska, and she turned and shrilled back in answer, her black eyes flashing. He reined up and slashed at her with his naigaka. Even before the jagged lead caught her face, ripping it from brow to chin, she drew her revolver and fired point-blank at him, missed him and fell as he spurred his horse on to her and struck again and again with his terrible whip. In an instant the street was in an uproar. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46 of the Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The beginning of the end. The whole thing happened far more quickly than it can be told. I dragged Anne back from the window, slammed the shutters to, for one of the Cossacks' favorite tricks was to fire at anyone seen at a window in the course of a street row, and curtly bidding Anne stay where she was for the moment, rushed downstairs and out into the street, revolver in hand. Mishka and half a dozen of our men were before me. There were very few of us in the house just now. Most of the others were with Loris and Vassilitzi, attending a big procession and meeting in Marshalkowska, with their usual object to maintain order as far as possible and endeavor to prevent conflicts between the troops and the people. It was astonishing how much Loris had achieved in this way. Even during these last terrible days of riot and bloodshed, he was ever on the alert. He seemed to know by instinct how to seize the right moment, to turn the temper of the crowd or the soldiers, and avert disaster. And his splendid personality never failed in its almost magnetic effect on everyone who came in contact with it. He was a born leader of men. And although he was always to the fore in every affair, as utterly reckless of his own safety as he was anxious to secure the safety of others, he had hitherto come unscathed through everything. Though a couple of our men had been killed outright, several others badly wounded, and the rest of us had got a few hard knocks, one way or other. I'd had a bullet through my left arm, the arm that was broken in the scrimmage outside Petersburg in June, a flesh wound only, luckily, though it hurt a bit, when I had time to think of it, which wasn't often. By the time we got into the street, the affair was over, the Cossacks urging their ponies at the usual wild gallop, and firing wantonly up at the houses, since the people who had been in the street had rushed for cover, were almost out of sight, and on the road and the sidewalk near at hand were several killed and wounded, mostly women, besides Madame Levinska, who had been the cause of it all, and had paid with her life. She was a hideous sight. She who 5 minutes before had been so gay, so audacious, so full of vivacity, the brutes had riddled her prostrate body with bullets, slashed at it with their whips, trampled it under their horses' hoofs, and it lay huddled, shapeless, with scarce a semblance to humanity left in it. I had a low, heartfelt cry and saw Anne beside me, her fair face ashen white, her eyes dilated with horror and compassion, as she stared at her friend's corpse. "Go back," I said roughly. "You can do nothing for her, and we will see to the rest. Go back, I say. There may be more trouble. My duty is here," she said quietly, and passed on to bend over a woman who was kneeling and screaming beside a small body, that of a lad about 8 or 9 years old, which lay very still. It was, as I well knew, useless to argue with Anne, so I went on with my ambulance work in grim silence, keeping near her and letting the others go to and fro, helping the wounded into shelter and carrying away the dead. Natalia had run out also and joined her mistress. Yusuf was not at hand. It was he whom we expected to bring the news we were awaiting so eagerly. He had come with us to Warsaw, and though he lived in the ghetto among his Jewish kindred, was constantly back and forth, he was invaluable as a messenger, a spy some might call him, although he knew no language but Yiddish and Polack, and the queer Russian lingo that was mingling of all three, but of course he learned a great deal from his fellow Jews, hunted, persecuted, wretched as they are. The Polish and the Russian Jews always have, or can command money, and the way they get hold of news is nothing short of marvelous. In the Warsaw ghetto, anyhow. There was quite a crowd around us soon, as the people who had fled before the Cossacks came back again, weeping, gesticulating, shouting imprecations on the Tsar, the government, the soldiers, as they always did when they were excited, but, as usual, doing very little to help. All at once there was a bigger tumult near at hand, and a mob came pouring along the street, a disorderly procession of men and women and little children, flaunting banners, waving red handkerchiefs, laughing, crying, shouting, and singing, as if they were more than half delirious with joy and excitement. And what was more remarkable, there were neither police nor soldiers in sight, nor any sign of Loris or his men. Many such processions occurred in Warsaw that day when the great news came. News that was soon to be so horribly discounted and annulled, and that, for me, was rendered insignificant, even in that first hour, by the great tragedy that followed hard upon its coming, the tragedy that will overshadow all my life, even after the lapse of years. I can scarcely bring myself to write of it, though every incident is stamped indelibly on my brain. Clear before my eyes now rises Anne's face, as, with her arm about the poor mother who was half fainting, she turned and looked at the joyous rabble. "What is it?" she cried, and at the same instant Yusuf hurried up and spoke breathlessly to her. She listened to his message with parted lips, her eyes starry with the light of ecstatic joy. "What is it?" I asked in my turn, for I couldn't catch what Yusuf said. "It's true, it's true! Oh, thank God for all his mercies! The end is in sight, Maurice. The new era is beginning, has begun. The Tsar has yielded. He has issued the manifesto granting all demands." I stood staring at her, stricken dumb, not by the news she told, but by her unearthly beauty. The face that was so worn with all the toil and conflict and anxiety of these strenuous days and weeks was transfigured, and above it her red gold hair shone like a crown of glory. I know what was in her mind at that moment. The thought that all had not been in vain, that the long struggle was almost ended, victory in sight, with freedom for the oppressed, cessation of bloodshed, a gradual return to law and order, the patient building up of a new civilization. Had I not heard her and Lord speaking in that strain many times, the last only a few hours back, when the reassuring rumors began to strengthen? They were dreamers, dreaming greatly. For a few seconds only did I stand gazing at her, for the mob was upon us. It jostled us apart, swept us along with it. And, as I fought my way to rejoin her, she and Natalia still supported the woman whose little son had just been killed. A quick revulsion of feeling came over me, and with it a queer premonition of imminent evil. The mob was so horrible, made up for the most part of the scum of Warsaw, reeking with vodka, drunk with liquor and excitement. Pah! They were not fit for the freedom they clamored for, and yet it was for them and for others like them that she toiled and plotted in peril of her life. Before I could win to her side, a warning cry arose ahead, followed instantly by the crackle of rifle fire, the phut of revolver shots. Yells, shrieks, an infernal din. A squadron of Cossacks was charging the crowd from the front, and, as it surged back, the same hellish sounds broke from the rear. More soldiers were following the mob, was between two fires, trapped, gasping, bleeding. I struggled against the rush, striving to make my way back to where I could see the gleam of Anne's golden hair. Close against the wall, I guessed that. With her usual resource, she had drawn her companions aside when the turmoil began, and they had their backs to the wall of one of the houses. The soldiers were right among the mob now, and it was breaking into groups, each eddying around one or more of the horsemen, who had as much as they could do to hold their own with whip and saber. It was impossible to reload the rifles, and anyhow they would not have been much use at these close quarters. I saw more than one horse overborne, his rider dragged from the saddle and hideously done to death. The rabble were like mad wolves rather than human beings. A fresh volley from the front, more troops were coming up there, yells of triumph from the rear, where the soldiers had been beaten back, and a way of retreat opened up. The furious eddies merged into a solid mass once more, a terror-stricken sauve-qui-peut before the reinforcements. Impossible to make headway against this, and yet every instant I was being swept along, further from Anne. All I could do was to set my teeth and edge towards the sidewalk. I got to the wall at last, set my back to it, and let the road pour by. The Cossacks in full chase now, felling every straggler they overtook, even slashing at the dead and wounded as they rode over them. I started to run back, and the wild horsemen did not molest me. I still wore the uniform in which I had left Zostrov. It was in tatters after this frenzied half-hour, but it stood me in good stead once again, and prevented my being shot down. There was Anne, still alive, thank God. She was kneeling beside the woman, and Natalia, also unhurt, stood by her, trying to raise her, and seemingly urging her to seek shelter. I tried to shout, but my mouth was too dry, so I ran on, stumbling over the bodies that strewed the ground. Some of the Cossacks had turned and were riding back. A group passed me as I neared Anne, and one of them swung his rifle and fired. Natalia fell with a scream, and Anne sprang up. "Shame, shame, you cowards, to shoot defenseless women," she cried indignantly. He spurred towards her, but I was first. I flung myself before her and fired at him. He reeled, swerved, and galloped on, but his companions were round us. I fired again and yet again. Something flashed above me. I felt a stunning blow on my forehead, staggered back, and fell. The last thing I heard was a woman's shriek. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of the Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Tragedy in the Square. It was the flat of the saber that had got me on the forehead. Otherwise, there'd have been an end of me at once. I was not unconscious for very long, for when I sat up, wiped the blood out of my eyes, and stared about me, sick and dazed, unable for the moment to recollect what had happened, I could still hear a tumult raging in the distance. The street itself was quiet, the soldiers, the mob were gone. All the houses were shut and silent, though scared faces were peeping from some of the upper windows. Here and there a wounded man or woman was staggering or crawling away, and close beside me a woman was sitting, like a statue of despair, with her back against the wall and something lying prone across her knees, the little mangled body of the boy who had been killed in the first scuffle that Marie Levinska had provoked. I remembered all then, and looked round wildly for Anne. There was no sign either of her or of Natalia. I scrambled up, impatiently binding my handkerchief tight round my wounded head, which was bleeding profusely now, and stood over the silent woman. "Where are they? Where's the lady who was with you?" I demanded hoarsely. "Answer me, for God's sake!" "They took her away, those devils incarnate." And the other woman got up and ran after. She answered dully, "There was an officer with them. He cried out that they would teach her not to insult the army." I felt my blood run cold. Since I returned to this accursed country, I had seen many, and heard of more, deeds of such fiendish cruelty perpetrated on weak women, on innocent little children, that I knew what the Cossacks were capable of when their blood was up. They were, as the women said, devils incarnate at such times. My strength came back to me, the strength of madness, and I rushed away, down that stricken street, with but one clear idea in my mind, to die avenging Anne, for I knew no power on earth could save her. As I ran the tumult waxed louder, coming, as I guessed, from the great square to which the street led at this end. Halfway along, a woman, huddled in the roadway, clutched at me, with a moaning cry. I shook off her grasp, glanced at her, and saw she was Natalia. The faithful soul had not been able to follow her mistress far. "Where have they taken her?" I cried. She could not speak, but she glared at me, a world of anguish and horror in her dark eyes, and pointed in the direction I was going, and I hurried on. I had a killer in my hand, the deadly little bludgeon of lead, set on a spiral copper spring. That was the favorite weapon of the mob, though I haven't the least notion as to when I picked it up. Now I was on the fringe of the crowd that overflowed from the square, and was pushing my way forward towards the center. A furious vortex of noise and confusion, a desperate fight was in progress, surging round something, someone. "It is Anna Petrovna!" a woman screamed above the din. "They tore her clothes from her. They are beating her to death with their nagaikas. Mother of mercy, that such things should be! "A la vie, à la mort! Save her, avenge her!" someone shouted. "I myself, I think," and the cry was taken up and echoed hoarsely on all sides. So there must be many of the League in the turmoil. Now I was in the thick of it, a swaying, struggling mass of men and horses. Many of the horses, plunging riderless as the wild horsemen, were dragged from their saddles, and disappeared in that stormy sea of outraged humanity. The Cossacks were getting the worst of it, for once, not a doubt of that. "Back!" roared a mighty voice. "We have her! Back, I say! Make way there! Let us pass!" Mishka's voice and Mishka's burly figure, mounted on a horse, pressed forward slowly, forcing a way through for another horseman, who followed close in his wake. "Make way, comrades!" shouted Mishka again. And at the cry, at the sight of the grim, silent horseman in the rear, a curious lull fell on all within sight and hearing, though elsewhere the strife raged furiously as ever. Loris sat erect in his saddle, as if on parade. bareheaded, his face set like a white mask, his brilliant blue eyes fixed, expressionless. No, that's not the right word, but I can't say what the expression was. Neither horror nor anguish nor despair, just a quiet, steady gaze, without a trace of human emotion in it. Save that he was breathing heavily and slowly. He might have been a statue or a corpse. I am sure he was quite unconscious of his surroundings. The reins lay loose on his horse's neck, and though its sides heaved and its coat was a plaster of sweat and foam and blood, the good beast took its own way quietly through the densely packed, suddenly silent mob, as if it, like its master, was oblivious of the mad world around them. But it was on the burden borne by the silent horseman that every eye was fixed, a burden partly hidden by a soldier's greatcoat. I knew she was dead. We all knew it, though the head, with its bright dishevelled hair, as it lay heavily on her lover's shoulder, seemed to have a semblance of life, as it moved slightly with the rise and fall of his breast. Her face was hidden, but from under the coat one long arm swayed limp, its whiteness hideously marred with jagged purple wheals, from which the blood still oozed, trickling down and dripping from the tip of the fingers, those beautiful ringless fingers that I knew and loved so well. I had no further thought of fighting now. My brain and heart were numb. So I just dropped my weapon and fell in behind the horse, following close on its heels. Others did the same, the whole section of the crowd on this side the square moving after us, and what, compared with the chaos of a few minutes back, was an orderly retreat. Well, it was for some of them that they did so, for we had scarcely gained the street when the rattling boom of artillery sounded in the rear, followed by a renewed babel of shrieks and yells. The guns had been brought up, and the work of summarily clearing the square had begun. But before the panic-stricken mob overtook us, flying helter-skelter before the new terror, Loris had urged his horse forward, or had quickened its pace of its own accord as the throng in the front thinned and gave way more easily. I think I tried instinctively to keep up with it, but the crowd closed round me. The rush of fugitives from the rear overwhelmed us, and I was carried along with it. I suppose I must have kept my footing, otherwise I should have been trampled down as were so many others on that awful day. But where I went and what I did during the hours that followed, I don't know, and I never shall. I lost all sense of time and place, though I've a hazy recollection of stumbling on alone through dark streets, sodden with the rain that was now falling in a persistent, icy drizzle. Some of the streets were silent and deserted, in others I paused idly to watch parties of sullen soldiers and police grumbling and swearing over their gruesome task of collecting the dead bodies and tossing them into carts, and again I stared into brilliantly lighted cafes and listened to the boisterous merriment of those within. Were they celebrating an imaginary victory or acting on the principle, "Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow, perchance tonight, we die"? Death brooded over the city that night. I felt his presence everywhere, in the streets that were silent as the grave itself, and those whence the dead were being removed, most of all where men and women laughed and sang and defied him. But I felt the dread presence in a curious, detached fashion. Death was my enemy, indeed, an enemy who would not strike, who passed me by as one beneath contempt, and always, clear before my eyes, in my ears, above all other sights and sounds, I saw Anne's face, heard her voice. Now she stood before me as I had first known her, a radiant, queenly vision, a girl whose laughing eyes showed never a care in the world, or a thought beyond the passing moment. Her hands were full of flowers, red as blood. Why? It was blood. It was staining her fingers, dripping from them, yet the man didn't see it. That man with the dark, eager face, who was standing beside her, who took a spray of the flowers from her hand. What a fool this Cassavetti is not to know that she is L'Amour. Now she is changed. She wears a black gown and the red flowers have vanished, but she is lovelier, more queenly than ever, as she looks at me with wide, pathetic eyes and says, I have deceived you. Again she stands with hands outstretched and cries, the end is in sight. Thank God for all his mercies. And her face is that of an angel in heaven. But always there is a barrier between her and me, a barrier impalpable, yet unpassable. I try to surmount it, but I am beaten back every time. Now it is Cassavetti who confronts me. Again and yet again it is Loris, with his stern, white face, his inscrutable blue eyes. He is on horseback, he rides straight at me, and he bears something in his arms. I struggled up and looked around me. I knew the place well enough. The long narrow room that had once been the salle à manger is the Vassilitzi's Warsaw house, but that, ever since I had known it, had been the principal ward in the amateur hospital instituted by Anne. A squalid ward enough, for the beds were made up on the floor, anyhow, and every bit of space was filled, leaving just a narrow track for the attendants to pass up and down. Along that track came a big figure that I recognized at once as Mishka, walking with clumsy caution. You are better? That is well, he said in a gruff undertone. How did I get here? I demanded. Yusuf brought you. He found you walking about the streets, raving mad. It is a marvel that you were not shot down. Then I remembered something at least of what had passed. How long since? I stammered, putting my hand up to my bandaged head. 2 days. And I will answer no questions. He growled in his surliest fashion. I will send you food, and you are to sleep again. He will see you later. He? Boris? He is safe then. He nodded, but would say no more. And presently I drifted back into sleep, or unconsciousness. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Grand Duchess passes. I've heard it said that sick or wounded people always die if they have no wish to live, but that's not true. I wanted to die as badly as anyone ever did, but yet I lived. I suppose I must have a lot of recuperative energy. Anyhow, next time I woke up, I felt pretty much as usual, except for a dull throb of the wound across my forehead, which someone had scientifically strapped up. My physical pain counted as nothing compared with the agony of shame and grief I suffered in my soul, as, bit by bit, I recollected all that had happened. I had failed in my trust, failed utterly. I was left to guard her. I ought to have prevented her going out into the street at all. And, when the worst came, I ought to have died with her. I tried to say something of this to Loris when I was face to face with him once more, in the room where Anne and I had been working when that ill-omened woman, Marie Levinska, interrupted us. But he stopped me with an imperative gesture. Do not reproach yourself, my friend. All that one man could do, you did. I know that well, and I thank you. One last service you shall do, if you are fit for it. You shall ride with us tonight, when we take her away. Mishka has told you of the arrangements? That is well. If we get through, you will not return here. That is why I have sent for you now. Not return? I repeated. No, he answered quietly but decisively. Once before I begged you to leave us, now I command you to do so, not because I do not value you, but because she would have wished for it. Wait, hear me out. You have done noble service in a cause that can mean nothing to you except that it is a cause that the lady I served lived and died for, sir, I interrupted. More than once before I had spoken of her to him as the woman we both loved, but now the other words seemed fittest. For not half an hour back I had learned the truth that I think I had known all along, that she who lay in her coffin in the great drawing-room yonder was, if her rights had been acknowledged, the Grand Duchess Loris of Russia. It was Vassilitzi who told me. They were married months ago in Paris, before she went to England, he had said, and for a moment a bitter wave of memory swept over me, though I fought against it. Hadn't I decided long since that the Queen could do no wrong, and therefore the deception she had practiced counted for nothing? All that really mattered was that I loved her in spite of all, asked nothing more than to be allowed to serve her. You served her under a delusion, he rejoined with stern sadness, and now it is no longer possible for you to serve her even so. I cannot discuss the matter with you, I cannot explain it. I would not if I could. Only this I repeat, I request, command you, to make your way out of this country as soon as possible, and rejoin your friends in England or America, where you will. It may mean more to you than you dare hope or imagine. You will have some difficulty probably, though some of the trains are running again now. I think your safest plan will be to ride to Kutno, or if necessary even to Alexandrovo. Here is a passport permitting you to leave Russia. It is made out in the name you assumed when you returned as William Pennington Gold, and it is quite in order, and I must ask you, for the sake of our friendship, to accept these. He took a roll of notes out of the drawer of the writing table, and as a memento, this. It is the only decoration I am able to confer on a most chivalrous gentleman. He held out a little case, open, and I took it with an unsteady hand. It contained a miniature of Anne, set in a rim of diamonds. I looked at it and at him, but I could not speak. My heart was too full. There is no need of words, my friend. We understand each other well, you and I. He continued, rising and placing his hands on my shoulders. You will do as I wish, as I entreat, insist. I would rather remain with you, I urged, and fight on for the cause. He shook his head. It is a lost cause. Or, at least, it will never be won by us. The manifesto, the charter of peace, what is it? A dead letter. Nicholas issued it indeed, but his ministers ignore it, and therefore he is helpless. His charter futile, and the reign of terror continues, will continue. Therefore I bid you go, and you must obey. So this is our parting, for though we shall meet, we shall be alone together no more. Therefore God be with you, my friend. When next I saw him, he stood with a drawn sword, stern and stately, foremost among the guard of honor round the catafalque, in the great drawing-room, where all that remained of the woman we both loved lay in state, ere it fared forth on its last journey. The old house was full of subdued sounds, for as soon as darkness fell, by ones and twos, men and women were silently admitted and passed as silently up the staircase to pay their last homage to their martyr. Nearly all of them had flowers in their hands, red flowers, sometimes only a single spray, but always those fatal geranium blossoms that were the symbol of the League. They laid them on the white pall, or scattered them on the folds that swept the ground, till the coffin seemed raised above a sea of blood. Every detail of that scene is photographed on my memory. The great room, hung with black draperies and brilliantly lighted by a multitude of tall wax candles. The air heavy with incense and the musky odor of the flowers. The two priests in gorgeous vestments who knelt on either side, near the head of the coffin, softly intoning the prayers for the dead. The black-robed nuns who knelt at the foot, silent save for the click of their rosaries, and the ghostly procession of men and women, many of them wounded, all haggard and wan, that passed by, and paused to gaze on the face that lay framed, as it were, beneath the panel of glass, and the coffin lid from which the pall was drawn back. Many of them, men as well as women, were weeping passionately. Some pressed their lips to the glass, others raised their clenched hands as if to register a vow of vengeance. A few, a very few, knelt in prayer for a brief moment ere they passed on. I stood at my post as one of the guard, and watched it all in a queer, impersonal sort of way, as if my soul was somehow outside my body. Although I stood some distance away, the quiet face under the glass seemed ever before my eyes, where I had looked on it before the solemn ceremonial began. How fair it was, and yet how strange, though it was unmarred, unless there was a wound hidden under the strip of white ribbon bound across the forehead and almost concealed by the softly waving chestnut hair. But even the peace of death had not been able to banish the expression of anguish imprinted on the lovely features. Above the closed eyelids, with their long dark lashes, the brows were contracted in a frown, and the mouth was altered, the white teeth exposed, set firmly in the lower lip. Still she was beautiful, but with the beauty of a Medusa. I could not think of the face as the one I had known and loved. It filled me with pity and horror and indignation indeed, but it was the face of a stranger. Why had I not been content to remember her as I had known her in life? She seemed so immeasurably removed from me now, and that not merely because I could no longer think of her as Anne Pendennis, only as the Grand Duchess Anna Catherine Petrovna, daughter of the Countess Anna Vassilitzi Pendennis, and wife of Loris Nikolai Alexis, Grand Duke of Russia, as the French inscription on the coffin plate ran, but also because the mystery that had surrounded her in life seemed more impenetrable than ever now that she was dead. Where was her father, to whom she had seemed so devotedly attached when I first knew her, even supposing he was dead? Why was he ignored in that inscription, save for the mere mention of his surname, the only indication of her mixed parentage? She had never spoken of him since that day at the hunting lodge, when she had said I must ask nothing concerning him. I had obeyed her in that, as in all else, and had even refrained from questioning Vassilitzi or any other who might have been able to tell me anything about Anthony Pendennis. Besides, there had been no time for queries or conjectures during all the feverish excitement of these days in Warsaw. But now, in this brief and solemn interlude, all the old problems recurred to my mind, as I stood on guard in the death chamber, and I knew that I could never hope to solve them. The ceremony was over at last. As in a dream, I followed the others, and, at a low-spoken word of command, filed past the catafalque with a last military salute, though I was no longer in uniform, for Mishka had brought me a suit of civilian clothes. In the same dazed way I found myself later riding near the head of the procession that passed through the dark silent streets, and out into the open country. I didn't even feel any curiosity or astonishment that a strong escort of regular cavalry lancers accompanied us, or when I recognized the officer in command as young Mirakov, whom I had last seen on the morning when I was on my way to prison in Petersburg. He didn't see me. Probably he wouldn't have known me if he had. And to this day I don't know how he and his men came to be there, or how the whole thing was arranged. Anyhow, none molested me. And slowly, through the sleeping city and along the open road, the cortege passed, ghost-like, in the dead of night. The air was piercingly cold, but the sky was clear, like a canopy of velvet spangled with great stars. Mishka rode beside me, and at last, when we seemed to have been riding for an eternity, he laid his hand on my rein and whispered hoarsely, "Now!" Almost without a sound we left the ranks, turned up a crossroad, and wheeling our horses at a few paces distant, waited for the others to go by, more unreal, more dreamlike than ever, save for the steady tramp of the horses' feet, the subdued jingle of the harness and accoutrements. They might have been a company of phantoms. I saw the gleam of the white pall above the black bulk of the open hearse, watched it disappear in the darkness, and knew that the Grand Duchess had passed out of my life forever. Still I sat, bareheaded, until the last faint sounds had died away, and the silence about us was only broken by the night whisper of the bare boughs above us. "Come, for we have yet far to go," Mishka said aloud, and started down the cross road at a quick trot. End of chapter 48.
Chapter 49 of the Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The end of an act. How far we rode, I can't say, but it was still dark when we halted at a small isolated farmhouse where Mishka roused the farmer, who came out grumbling at being disturbed before daybreak. After a muttered colloquy, he let us in and called his wife to prepare tea and food for us while he took charge of the horses. "You must eat and sleep," Mishka announced in his gruff way. "You ought to be still in the hospital, but we are fools in these days, every one of us. Ho, little father, shake down some hay in the barn. We will sleep there." I must have been utterly exhausted, for I slept heavily, dreamlessly, for many hours, and only awoke under Mishka's hand as he shook me. Through the doorway of the barn, the level rays of the westering sun showed that the short November day was drawing to a close. "You have slept long, that is well, but now we must be up and away if we are to reach Kutno tonight." "You go with me?" "So far, yes. If there are no trains running yet, we go on to Alexandrovo. I shall not leave you till I have set you safely on your way. Those are my orders." "I don't know why I'm going," I muttered dejectedly, sitting up among the hay. "I would rather have stayed." "You go because he ordered you to, and we all obey him whether we like it or not," he retorted. "And he was right to send you. Why should you throw your life away for nothing? Come, there is no time to waste in words. I have brought you water. Wash and dress. Remember, you are no longer a disreputable revolutionist, but a respectable American citizen, and we must make you look a little more like one." There was something queer in his manner. Gruff as ever, he yet spoke to me, treated me, almost as if I were a child who had to be heartened up as well as taken care of. But I didn't resent it. I knew it was his way of showing affection, and it touched me keenly. We had learned to understand each other well, and no man ever had a stauncher comrade than I had in Mishka Pavlov. During that last of our many rides together, he was far less taciturn than usual. I had never heard him say so much at one stretch as he did, while we pressed on through the dusk. "We have shown you something of the real Russia since you came back. How many weeks since? And now, if you get safe across the frontier, you will be wise to remain there, as any wise man, or woman either, who values life." "I don't value my life," I interrupted bitterly. "You think you do not. That is because you are hasty and ignorant, though the ignorance is not your fault. You think your heart is broken, Hind? Well, one of these days, not long hence, perhaps, you will think differently, and find that life is a good thing after all, when it has not to be lived in Russia. If we ever meet again, you will know I have spoken the truth." I knew that before many days had passed, and wondered then how much he could have told me if he had been minded. "If we meet again?" I echoed sadly. "Is that likely, friend Mishka?" "God knows. Stranger things have happened. If I die with, or before my master, well, I die. If I do not, I, too, shall make for the frontier when he no longer has need of me. Where is the good of staying? What should I do here? I would like to see peace, yes, but there will be no peace within this generation." "But your father?" I asked, thinking of the staunch old man who had gone back to his duty at Zastrov. "My father is dead." "Dead?" I exclaimed, startled for the moment out of the inertness that paralyzed my brain. "He was murdered a week after he returned to Zastrov. There was trouble with the moujiks, as I knew there would be. The garrison at the castle was helpless, and there was trouble there also, first about my little bomb that covered our retreat. You knew I planned that, hein?" "No, but I suspected it." "And you said nothing. You are discreet enough in your way. He never suspected. Does not even now. He thinks it was a plot hatched by his enemies, perhaps by Stravinsky himself, the old fox. But we should never have got through to Warsaw, if, for a time at least, all had not believed that he and I, and you, were finished off in that affair. Better for him, perhaps, if it had been so." He fell silent, and I know he was thinking of the last tragedy, as I was. The memory of it was hard enough for me to bear. What must it not be for Loris? "Yes, there was much trouble," Mishka resumed. "Old Stravinsky was summoned to Petersburg, and he had scarcely set out before the revolution began, and the troops were recalled. There was but a small garrison left. I doubt if they would have moved a finger in any case. And so the moujiks took their own way, and my father went to his reward. He was a good man, and their best friend for many years, but that they did not understand, since the Almighty has made them beasts without understanding." The darkness had fallen, but I guessed he shrugged his shoulders in the way I knew so well. A fatalist to the fingertips was Mishka. "The news came 3 days since," he continued, "and such news will come, in time, from every country district. I tell you all you have seen and known is but the beginning, and God knows what the end will be. Therefore, as I have said, this is no country for honest, peaceable folk. My mother died long since, God be thanked, and now but one tie holds me here. Look! Yonder are the lights of Kutno." The town was comparatively quiet, though it was thronged with soldiers, and there were plenty of signs that Kutno had passed through its own days of terror, and was probably in for more in the near future. We left our horses at a kabak, and walked through the squalid streets to the equally squalid railway depot, where we parted almost in silence. "God be with you," Mishka growled huskily. His face looked more grim than ever under the poor light of a street lamp near, and he held my hands in a grip whose marks I bore for a week after. He strode heavily away, never once looking back, and I turned into the depot, where I found the entrance, the ticket office, and the platform guarded by surly, unkempt soldiers with fixed bayonets. I lost count of the times I had to produce my passport, and turned a deaf ear to the insults lavished upon me by most of my interlocutors. I thought I had better resume my pretended ignorance of Russian and trust a German to carry me through, as it did. I was allowed to board one of the cars at last. They were filthy, lighted only by a candle here and there, and crowded with refugees of all classes. I was lucky to get in at all, and though all the cars were soon crammed to their utmost capacity, it was an hour or more before the train started. Then it crawled and jolted through the darkness at a pace that I reckon would land us at Alexandrovo somewhere about noon next day, if we ever got there at all. But the indescribable discomforts of that long night journey at least prevented anything in the way of coherent thought. I look back on it now as a blank interval, a curtain dropped at the end of a long and lurid act in the drama of life. At Alexandrovo, more soldiers, more hustling, More interrogations, then the barrier, and beyond, freedom. I've a hazy notion that I arrived at a big, well-lighted station and was taken possession of by someone who hustled me into a cab. But the next thing I remember clearly was waking and finding myself in bed. A nice, clean bed, with a huge down pillow affair on top, in a big, well-furnished room. That down affair, I couldn't remember the name of it for the moment, and the whole aspect of the room showed that I was in a German hotel, though how I got there I really couldn't remember. I rang the bell. My hand felt so heavy that I could scarcely lift it as far, and it looked curiously thin, with blue marks like faint bruises on it, and the veins stood out. A plump, comfortable-looking woman in a nurse's uniform bustled in and beamed at me quite affectionately. "Now, this is better." "Yes, I said it would be so," she exclaimed in German. "You feel quite yourself again, but weak." "Yes, that is only to be expected." "Will you be so good as to tell me where I am?" I asked, as politely as I knew how, staring at her, and wondering if I'd ever seen her before. "Oh, you men! No sooner do you find your tongue and your senses than you begin to ask questions. And yet you say it is women who are the talkers," she answered, with a kind of ponderous archness. "You are at the Hotel Reichshof, to be sure, and being well taken care of. The head?" She touched my forehead with her firm, cool fingers. "It hurts no more?" "Ah, it has healed beautifully. I did well to remove the strappings yesterday. There will be a scar, yes, but that cannot be helped. And now, you are hungry? Ah, we will soon set that right. It is as I said, though even the doctor would not believe me. The wounds are nothing, so to speak. The exhaustion was a mischief. You came through from Russia? What times they are having there! You are fortunate to get through it all. Yes, you are a very fortunate man and an excellent patient. Therefore, you shall have some breakfast." She worried me with her persistent cheerfulness, but it would have been ungracious to tell her so. She was right in one way, though. I was ravenously hungry, and when she returned, bringing a tray with delicious coffee and rolls, I started on them and let her babble away, as she did, 19 to the dozen. I gathered that nearly a week had passed since I got to Berlin. The hotel, too, had captured me at the depot, and I collapsed as I got out of the cab. In the ordinary way, you would have been sent to a hospital, but when they saw the portrait— "What portrait?" I asked, but even as I spoke, my memory was returning, and I knew she must mean the miniature Loris had given me. "What portrait? Why, the Fräulein Pendennis, to be sure." End of chapter 49, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 16, 2026. Chapter 50 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. England once more. I started up at that. "Fräulein Pendennis?" I gasped. "You know her?" "I should do so after nursing her through such an illness, and so short a time since." "But when did you nurse her? Where?" "Why, here. Not in this room, but in the hotel. It is near 4 months since. She also was taken ill on her way from Russia. There is a strange coincidence. But hers was a much more severe illness. We did not think she could possibly recover, and for weeks we feared for her brain. She had suffered some great shock, though the Herr, her father, would not say what it was." She looked at me interrogatively, but I had no mind to satisfy her curiosity, though I guessed at once what the shock must have been, and that Anne had broken down after the strain of that night in the forest near Petersburg and all that had gone before it. She had never referred to this illness. That was so like her. Anything that concerned herself, personally, she always regarded as insignificant, but I thought now that it had a good deal to do with her worn appearance. "And Herr Pendennis? Where is he?" I demanded next. "I do not know. They left together when the Fräulein was at last able to travel." "Ah, but they are devoted to each other, those two. It is beautiful to see such affection in these days when young people so often seem to despise their parents." It was strange, very strange. The more I tried to puzzle things out, the more hopeless the tangle appeared. Why had Pendennis allowed her to return alone to Russia, especially after she had come through such a severe illness? Of course, he might be attached to some other branch of the League, but it seemed unlikely that he would allow himself to be separated from her when he must have known that she would be surrounded by greater perils than ever. I decided that I could say nothing to this garrulous woman, kindly though she was, or to any other stranger. I dreaded the time when I would have to tell Mary something, at least, of the truth, though, even to her, I would never reveal the whole of it. The manager came to my room presently, bringing my money and papers and the miniature which he had taken charge of. Lucky it was for me that I had fallen into honest hands when I reached Berlin. He addressed me as Herr Gould, of course, and was full of curiosity to know how I got through and if things were as bad in Warsaw as the newspapers reported. Berlin was full of Russian refugees, but he had not met one from Warsaw. "They say the governor will issue no passports permitting Poles to leave the city," he said, "but you are an American, which makes all the difference." "I guess so," I responded, wondering how Loris had managed to obtain that passport, and if it would have served to get me through if I had started from the city instead of making that long détour to Kutno. I assured my host that the state of affairs in the city of terror I had left was indescribable, and I'd rather not discuss it. He seemed quite disappointed, and with a queer flash of memory I recalled how the little chattering woman, I forgot her name, had been just as disappointed when I didn't give details about Cassavetti's murder on that Sunday evening in Mary's garden. There are a lot of people in this world who have an insatiable appetite for horrors when they can get them at second hand. They say it's like the days of the terror in the 60s over again, tortures and shootings and knoutings, and that the Cossacks stripped a woman and knotted her to death one day last week. Did you hear of that? "I tell you I don't mean to speak of anything that I've seen or heard," I said, feeling that I wanted to kick him. He apologized profusely, then made me wince again by referring to the miniature, with more apologies for looking at it when he thought it necessary to take possession of it. "But we know the so amiable Fräulein and Herr Pendennis so well. They have often stayed here," he explained, "and it is such a marvelous likeness, painted quite recently, too, since the illness from which the Fräulein has so happily recovered." I muttered something vague, and managed to get rid of him on the plea that I felt too bad to talk any more, which drew fresh apologies. But when he had gone, I examined the miniature more closely than I'd had an opportunity of doing since Loris gave it to me. It was not recently painted, I was quite sure of that, and yet it certainly did show her as I had known her during these last few weeks before death printed that terrible change on her face, and not as she was in London. But that must be my imagination. The artist had caught her expression at a moment when she was grave and sad. No, not exactly sad, for the lips and eyes were smiling. A faint, wistful, inscrutable smile, like the smile of the Sphinx, as it gazes across the desert, across the world, into space and eternity. As I gazed on the brave, sweet face, the sordid misery that had enveloped my soul ever since that awful moment when I saw her dead body borne past in the square was lifted, and I knew that the last poignant agony was the end of a long path of thorns that she had trodden unflinchingly with royal courage and endurance for weary months and years, and that she was at peace, purified by her love, by her suffering from all taint of earth. Dumb lies the world. The wild, yelling world with all its madness is behind thee. I started for England next evening and traveled right through. I sent one wire to Jim from Berlin and another from Flushing, where I found a reply from him waiting me. All well, meeting you. That all well reassured me, for now, that I had leisure to think. My conscience told me how badly I'd treated him and Mary. It's true that before I started from London with Bishka, I wrote saying that I was off on Secret Service and they must not expect to hear from me for a time, but I should be all right. That was to smooth Mary down, for I knew what she was. Dear little soul, and I didn't want her to be fretting about me. If she once got any notion of my real destination, she'd have fretted herself into a fever. But if she hadn't guessed at the truth, I might be able to evade telling her anything at all. Perhaps I might pitch a yarn about having been to Tibet or Korea, for she would certainly want to know something of the reason for my changed appearance. I scarcely recognized myself when I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror at Berlin. A haggard, unkempt ruffian, gray-haired and with hollow eyes, staring out of a white face, disfigured by a half-healed cut across the forehead. I certainly was a miserable-looking object, even when I'd had my hair cut and my beard shaved, since I no longer needed it as a disguise. Mary had always disliked that beard, but I doubted if she'd know me, even without it. I landed at Queensborough on a typical English November afternoon, raw and dark, with a drizzle falling that threatened every moment to thicken into a regular fog. There were very few passengers, and I thought, at first, I was going to have the compartment to myself. But, at the last moment, a man got in whom I recognized at once as Lord Southbourne. I hadn't seen him on the boat. Doubtless he'd secured a private stateroom. He just glanced at me casually. I had my fur cap well pulled down, settled himself in his corner, and started reading a London paper, one of his own among them. He brought a sheaf of them in with him, though I contented myself with the Courier. It was pleasant to see the familiar rag once more. I hadn't set eyes on a copy since I left England. I didn't speak to Southbourne, though. I don't quite know why, except that I felt like kind of a Rip Van Winkle, though I'd only been away a little more than a couple of months. And somehow I dreaded that lazy but penetrating stare of his, and the questions he would certainly fire off at me. So I lay low and said nothing, keeping the paper well before my face, till we stopped at Herne Hill for tickets to be taken. As the train started again, he threw down his paper and moved opposite me and held out his hand. "Hello, Wynn," he drawled. "Is it you or your ghost? Didn't you know me? Or do you mean to cut me? Why, man alive, what's wrong?" he added, with a quick change of tone. I'd only heard him speak like that once before, in the magistrate's room at the police court, after the murder charge was dismissed. "Nothing, except that we've had a beastly crossing," I answered, with a poor attempt at jauntiness. "Where have you come from? Russia?" he demanded. I nodded. So you went back after all. I thought as much. Who's had your copy?" "I've sent none. I went on private business," I protested hotly. It angered me that he should think me capable of going back on him. "I oughtn't to have said that. I apologize," he said stiffly, still staring at me intently. "But what on earth have you been up to? More prison experiences? Well, keep your own counsel, of course. I've kept it for you, as far as I knew it. Mrs. Cayley believes I sent you off to the ends of the earth, and I've been mendaciously assuring her that you're all right, though Miss Pendennis has had her doubts, and nearly bowled me out once or twice." "Miss who?" I shouted. "Miss Pendennis, of course. Didn't you know she was staying with your cousin again? A queer coincidence about that portrait. Hello, here we are at Victoria. And there's Cayley." End of chapter 50, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 18, 2026.
Chapter 51 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Real Anne. "It's incredible," I exclaimed. Well, it's true anyhow, Jim asserted, and I don't see myself where the incredibility comes in. You say that Mr. Pendennis wrote from Berlin not a week after I left England, and that he and Anne, are at this moment staying with you in Chelsea. When I've been constantly with her, saw her murdered in the streets of Warsaw. That must have been the other woman, the woman of the portrait, whoever she may be. No one seems to know, not even Pendennis. We've discussed it several times, not before Anne. We don't think it wise to remind her of that Russian episode. It upsets her too much, for she's not at all the thing even yet, poor girl. He seemed quite to have changed his mental attitude towards Anne, and spoke of her as kindly as if she had been Mary's sister. It's another case of mistaken identity, based on an extraordinary likeness, he continued. There have been many such, more in fact, than in fiction. Look at the Bancrofts and their doubles, for instance, a pair of them, husband and wife, who passed themselves off as Sir Squire and Lady Bancroft innumerable times a few years back, and were never discovered. And yet, though it mightn't be difficult for a clever impersonator to make up like Bancroft, it seems incredible that he could find a woman who could pose successfully as the incomparable Mary Wilton. You should have seen her in her prime, my boy. The most fascinating little creature imaginable, and the plainest, if you only looked at her features. It must have been a jolly sight harder to represent her than if she'd been a merely beautiful woman, like Anne. She's an uncommon type here in England, but not on the continent. I don't suppose it would be difficult to find half a dozen who would answer to the same description if one only knew where to look for 'em. It wasn't the resemblance of a type, eyes and hair, and that sort of thing, I said slowly. The voice, the manner, the soul. Why, she knew me, recognized me, even with my beard, spoke of Mary. She must have been an astonishingly clever woman, poor soul, and one who knew a lot more about Anne than Anne and her father knew of her. Well, you'd soon be able to exchange notes with Pendennis himself, and perhaps you'll hit on a solution of the mystery between you. What's that? I had pulled out the miniature and now handed it to him. He examined it intently under the bright light of the little acetylene lamp inside the room. This is another portrait of her. You're right. There's a marvelous likeness. I'd have sworn it was Anne, though the hair is different now. It was cut short in her illness. Anne's illness, I mean, of course. And now it's a regular tousle of curls. Here, put it up. I wouldn't say anything about it to Anne if I were you. Not at present. The carriage stopped, and as I stumbled out and along the flagged way, the front door was flung open, and in a blaze of light I saw Mary, and, a little behind her, Anne herself. I'm afraid I was very rude to Mary in that first confused moment of meetings and greetings. I think I gave her a perfunctory kiss in passing, but it was Anne on whom my eyes were fixed. Anne who, wonder of wonders, was in my arms the next moment. What did it matter to us that there were others standing around? She was alive, and she loved me as I loved her. I read that in her eyes as they met mine, and nothing else in the world was of any consequence. You went back to Russia in search of me. I was quite sure of it in my mind, though Mary declared you were off on another special correspondent affair for Lord Southbourne, and he said the same. He's rather a nice man, isn't he? And Lady Southbourne's a dear. But I knew somehow he wasn't speaking the truth. And you've been in the wars, you poor boy. Why, your hair is as gray as father's. And how did you get that wound on your forehead? I've had some lively times one way and another, dear. But never mind about that now, I said. We were sitting together by the fire in the drawing-room, after dinner, alone. For Mary had effaced herself like the considerate little woman she is. Probably she had joined Jim and Pendennis in the smoking-room. That was also Jim's sanctum. Tell me about yourself. How did you get to Petersburg? It was you. Yes, but I can't remember even now how I got there, she answered, frowning at the fire and biting her underlip. A queer thrill ran through me as I watched her. She was so like that other. I got into the train at Calais, and I suppose I fell asleep. I was very tired after the dinner at the Cecil and Mrs. Sutherland's party. There were 2 other people in the same carriage, a man and a woman. That's the last thing I can recollect clearly until I found myself again in a railway carriage. I have a confused notion of being on board ship in between, but it was all like a dream until I suddenly saw you and called out to you. I was in an open carriage then, driving through a strange city that I know now was Petersburg. I was taken to a house where several horrid men, quite superior sort of men in a way, but they seemed as if they hated me, and I couldn't think why. Asked me a lot of questions. At first, they spoke in a language I didn't understand at all, but afterwards in French. And then I found they wanted to know about Mr. Cassavetti. They called him by another name, too. Zelensky, I said. Yes, that was it, though I haven't been able to remember it. They wouldn't believe me when I said I only met him quite casually at dinner, the night before I was kidnapped. For I really was kidnapped, Maurice, and that I knew nothing whatever about him. They kept me in a dark cell for hours, till I was half crazy with anger and terror, and then they brought me out, and I saw you and Father, and the next thing I knew, I was in a bed in a hotel we often stayed at, in Berlin. Father tries to persuade me that I imagined the whole thing, but I didn't. Now did I, Maurice? And what does it all mean? It was all a mistake. You were taken for someone else, someone whom you resemble very closely. That's just what I thought, though Father wouldn't believe it, or he pretends he won't, but I am sure he knows something that he will not tell me. But there's another thing, that dreadful man Cassavetti. Perhaps I oughtn't call him that, as he's dead. I only heard about the murder a little while ago, and then almost by accident, Maud Vereker told me. Do you know her? That frivolous little chatterbox? Yes, I've met her, though I'd forgotten her name. She told me all about it one day. Mary and Jim had never said a word. They seemed to be in a conspiracy of silence. But when I heard it, I was terribly upset. Think of anyone suspecting you of murdering him, Maurice, just because he lived on the floor above you, and you happened to find him. You poor boy, what dreadful troubles you have been through. There was an interlude here. We had a good many such interludes, but even when my arm was around her, when my lips pressed hers, I could scarcely realize that I was awake and sane. It was just as well they did suspect me, darling, I said after a while, or I most certainly shouldn't have been there now. She nestled closer to me with a little sob. Oh, Maurice, Maurice, I can't believe you're safe here again after all, and I feel I was to blame for it all. You? Why, how's that, sweetheart? Because I flirted with Cassavetti at the dinner. Don't you remember? That seemed to be the beginning of everything. I was so cross with you, and he puzzled and interested me, though I felt frightened just at the last when I gave him that flower. Maurice, did he take me for the other girl? And was there any meaning attached to the flower? Yes. The flower was a symbol. It meant a great deal. Among other things, the fact that you gave it to him made him quite sure you were the person he mistook you for. You are marvelously like her. Then you have met her also? Who is she? Where is she? She is dead, and I don't know for certain who she was until Jim met me tonight. I believe she was you. Were we so like as that? She breathed. Why, she might have been my sister. But I never had one. My mother died when I was born, you know. Tell me about her, Maurice. I can't, dear, except that she was as brave as she was beautiful, and her life was one long tragedy. But I'll show you her portrait. She gave a little cry of astonishment as I handed her the miniature. The diamond setting flashed under the softly shaded electric light. Oh, how lovely! But why? She's far more beautiful than I am, or shall ever be. Did she give you this, Maurice? There was a queer note in her voice as she put the question. It sounded almost like a touch of jealousy. No, her husband gave it to me. After she died, I said sadly. Her husband? She was married then? Who was he? A man worthy of her, but I'd rather not talk about them. Not just at the present. It's too painful. Oh, Maurice, I'm so sorry, she murmured in a swift penitence, and to my great relief she questioned me no more for that evening. But I told the whole story, so far as I knew it, to Pendennis and Jim after the rest of the household had gone to bed, and we sat till the small hours, comparing notes and discussing the whole matter, which still presented many perplexing points. I omitted nothing. I said how I had seen Anne, as I believed then and until this day, in that boat on the Thames, how I had felt certain that she had been to Cassavetti's room that night and was cognizant of his murder, what I had learned from Mr. Traherne down in Cornwall, and everything of importance that had happened since. Jim punctuated the story with exclamations and comments, but Anthony Pendennis listened almost in silence, though when I came to the part about the mad woman from Siberia who had died at the hunting lodge, and who was spoken of as the Countess Vassilitzi, he started and made a queer sound like a groan, though he signed to me to continue. I was glad afterwards that I hadn't described what she looked like. He was a grave, stern man, wonderfully self-possessed. It was a strange story, he said, when I had finished. A mysterious one. Do you hold the key to the mystery? I asked him point blank. No, though I can shed a little light on it. A very little, and I fear even that will only make the rest more obscure. But it is only right that I should give you confidence for confidence, Mr. Wynn, since you have suffered so much through your love for my daughter, and through the machinations of this unhappy woman who certainly impersonated her, for her own purposes. I winced at that, although I knew now that the unhappy woman was not she whom I loved. It hurt me to hear her spoken of in that stern, condemnatory way, but I let it pass. I wanted to hear his version. End of chapter 51. Read by LLDM26, Inglewood, June 25th, 2026. Chapter 52 of The Red Symbol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Red Symbol by John Ironside. The Whole Truth. She must have been one of the Vassilitzis, and therefore Anne's near kinsman, Pendennis said slowly. You say she was often spoken of as Anna Petrovna. That explains nothing, for Petrovna is, of course, a very common family name in Russia. The daughter of Peter, it really means, and it is often used as a familiar form of address. Just as in Scotland, a married woman is often spoken of by her friends by her maiden name. My wife was called Anna Petrovna, but you say this unhappy woman's name was given as Vassilitzi Pendennis. That I cannot understand. It is impossible that she could be my daughter, that the mad lady from Siberia could have been my wife, and yet, my God, if that should be true after all. They did send me word, and I believed it at the moment, though later I thought it was a trick to get me and Anne into their power, part of a long-delayed scheme of revenge. His face was as white as death, with little beads of sweat on the forehead, and his hand shook slightly, though he showed no other signs of emotion. Traherne told you the truth about my marriage, Mr. Wynn, he continued, raising his voice a little and looking at me with stern, troubled eyes. Until you spoke of him, I had almost forgotten his existence. But he did not know quite everything. The one point on which I and my dear wife were at variance was her connection with this fatal league. Yes, it was in existence then, and I suppose I still am, in a way, a member of it, though I only became one in order that I might protect my wife as far as possible. After she died and I was banished from Russia, I severed myself from it for many years, until a few months ago, when I received a communication to the effect that my wife was still alive, that she had been released and restored to her relatives, to her brother Stepan, I supposed. He had always hated me, but he loved her well, though he managed to make his escape at the time she was taken. But Stepan Vassilitzi is a young man, younger than I am, I interrupted. He is the son. The father died some years back, though I only learned that after I returned to Russia. I started at once. That was how you missed me when you came to Berlin. I sent first to the old chateau near Warsaw, which had been the principal residence of the Vassilitzis, but I found it in possession of strangers. It had been confiscated in '81, and nothing was known of the old family beyond the name. I wasted several days in futile inquiries, and then went on to Petersburg, where I got in communication with some of the League. I had to execute the utmost caution. fashion, as you will understand, but I found out that a meeting was to be held at a place I knew of old, the ruined chapel, and that Anna Petrovna was to be there. My wife, as I supposed. The rest of that episode, the moment I saw Anne brought out, I realized, or thought I did, for I am not sure now, that it was a trap. That big, rough-looking man who carried Anne off. He was the Grand Duke Loris. So I guessed when you spoke of him just now, and at the time I knew, of course, that he was not what he appeared, for he didn't act up to his disguise. He did when it was necessary, I said emphatically, remembering how he had slanged the hotel servants that evening at Petersburg. Well, he said enough to convince me that I was right, though why he should trouble himself on our behalf I couldn't imagine. We hadn't gone far when we heard firing and halted to listen. We held a hurried consultation, and I told him briefly who we were. He seemed utterly astounded, and now I understand why. He evidently had thought Anne was that other. He decided that we should be safer if we remained in the woods till all was quiet, and then make our way to Petersburg and claim protection at the English embassy. We went on again. Anne was still insensible, and he insisted on carrying her till we came to a charcoal burner's hut. He told us to stay there till a messenger came who would guide us to the road, where a carriage would be in waiting to take us to Petersburg. He left us then, and I have never seen him since, but he kept his word, though it was nearly a week before the messenger came. A big, surly man, very lame as the result of a recent accident, I think. Mishka, I exclaimed. He would not tell his name and said very little one way or the other, but he took us to the carriage, and we reached the city without hindrance. Anne was in a dazed condition the whole time, partly, no doubt, as a result of the drugs which those scoundrels who kidnapped her and brought her to Russia had administered. She knew me, but everything else was almost a blank to her, as it still is. She has only a faint recollection of the whole affair. I secured a passport for her, and we started at once, though she wasn't fit to travel, and the journey nearly killed her. We ought to have stopped as soon as we were over the frontier, but I wanted to get as far away from Russia as possible. She just held out till we got to Berlin, and then broke down altogether. My poor child. I ought to have written to Mrs. Cayley, I know, but I never gave a thought to it till Anne began to recover. That's all right. Mary understood. She's forgiven the omission long ago, Jim interposed. But I say, Pendennis, I was right. After all, I always stuck out that it was a case of mistaken identity, though you wouldn't believe me. Pendennis nodded. The woman from Siberia. What was she like? He demanded, turning again to me. I can't say. I only saw her from a distance, and for a minute or so, I answered evasively. She was tall and white-haired. I was certain in my own mind that she was his wife, for I'd heard the words she called out. His name, Antony, not the French Antoine, but as a foreigner would pronounce the English word. But I should only add to his distress if I told him that. Well, it remains a mystery, and one that I suppose we shall never unravel, he said heavily, at last. But it was unraveled for us, and that before many weeks had passed. One dark afternoon, just before Christmas, I dropped in for a few minutes, as I generally contrived to do before going down to the office, for I was on the courier again temporarily. Anne and her father were still the Cayleys' guests, for Mary wouldn't hear of their going to a hotel, and they had only just found a flat near at hand to suit them, having at last returned to England. Antony Pendennis had decided to remain. He'd had enough, at last, of wandering around the continent. Mary had other callers in the drawing room, so I turned into Jim's study, where Anne joined me in a minute or so. Anne, who, in a few short months, would be my wife. The front doorbell rang, and voices sounded in the lobby, but though I heard, I didn't heed them until Anne held up her hand. Hush! Who is Marshall talking to? The prim maid was speaking in an unusually loud voice, shouting, in fact, as English folks always do when they're addressing a foreigner, as if that would make them more intelligible. A moment later she came in, looking flustered, and closed the door. There's a foreign man outside, sir, and I think he's asking for you, but I can't make out half he says. Not even his name, though it sounds like Misky Ploff. Mishka, I shouted, making for the door. Mishka it was, grim, gaunt, and travel-stained, and as he gripped my hands, I knew, without a word, that Loris was dead. I led him in, and he started slightly when he saw Anne, who stared at him with a queer expression of half-recognition. She knew who he was, for I had told her a great deal about him, though we had all agreed it was quite unnecessary that she should know the whole story of my experiences in Russia. There were a lot of details I'd never given even to her father and Jim. She recovered herself almost instantly and held out her hand to him with a gracious smile, saying in German, "Welcome to England, Herr Pavlov. I have heard so much of you and have much to thank you for." He bowed clumsily over the hand, with the deference due to a princess, and watched her as she passed out of the room. His rugged face strangely softened. "So, she is safe after all," he said when the door closed. "We all hoped so, but we did not know. That is the one reason why you were never told. For if she were dead, what need to tell you? And also, but I will come to that later, there is a marvelous resemblance, but it is often so with twins." "Twins?" I ejaculated, and yet I think I'd known it, at the back of my mind ever since the night of my return to England. Only Pendennis had spoken so decidedly about his only child. Why, Herr Pendennis himself doesn't know that. No, it was kept from him from the first. It is an old history now, though I learned it within these last few months, chiefly from Natalia. It was her doing. Hers and the old Count's, Stepan's father. The old Count had always resented the marriage. He hated Herr Pendennis, his brother-in-law, as much as he loved his sister. Herr Pendennis was away in England when the children were born, and that increased the Count's bitterness against him. He thought he should have hastened back, as without doubt he should have done. It was but a few days later that the young mother was arrested, and, ill as she was, they took her away to prison in a litter. The Count got timely warning and made his escape. It was impossible for his sister to accompany him. Also, he did not believe they would arrest her in her condition, and she was the wife of an Englishman. He should have known that Russians are without pity or mercy. But the child, he could not take a week-old baby with him if he had to fly for his life. No, Natalia did that. She escaped to the ghetto and took the baby with her, and young Stepan, who was then a lad of 6 years. There was great confusion at the chateau, and the few who knew that 2 children were born doubtless believed one had died. For the rest, Natalia remained in the ghetto for some 3 years, and then rejoined the Count at the old house near Zisky, the hunting lodge. It was all he had left, though he had patched up a peace with the government. He had friends at court in those days. You know what the child became? He trained her deliberately to that end as long as he lived. Taught her also that her father deserted her and her mother in the hour of need, left them to their fate. It was a cruel revenge to take. "It was," I said emphatically, "but when did she learn she had a sister?" "That I do not know. I think it was not long before she came to England last. She had often been here before, for brief visits only. She came on the yacht then, with my master. It was their honeymoon, and we had been cruising for some weeks, the only peaceful time she had ever had in her life. He wished her never to return to Russia, to go with him to South America, or live in England, but she would not. She loved him, yes, but she loved the cause more. It was her very life, her soul. The yacht lay off Greenwich for the night. She meant to land next day, and come up to see Selinsky. She had never happened to meet him, though he was one of the 5. Selinsky, Cassavetti, Mishka, it was not she who murdered him. No, it was Stepan Vassilitzi who killed him, and he deserved it, the hound. I had somewhat to do with it also, for I had come to London in advance and was to rejoin the yacht that night, near the bridge at Westminster, whom I should meet but Yusuf, whom I thought to be in Russia, and he told me that, which made me bundle him into a cab and drive straight to Greenwich. The Countess Anna, she was Grand Duchess then, though we never addressed her so, made her plans speedily, as she ever did. She slipped away with only her cousin Stepan and I. My master did not know. He thought she was in our cabin after dinner. We rowed swiftly up the river. The tide was near flood, and I waited in the boat while they went to Selinsky's. Yusuf had given them the key. They found his paper, with all the evidences of his treachery to the League and to her. Selinsky came in at the moment when their task was finished, and Stepan stabbed him to the heart. It was not her wish. She would have spared him, vile though he was. Well, it is all one now. They all are gone, she and Stepan, and my master. He is dead then? Should I be here if he were living? No, they did not kill him. I think he really died when she did, that his soul passed, as it were, with hers, though he made no sign, as you know. I found him, it was more than a week since, in the early morning, sitting at the table where she used to write, his head on his arm, so. He was dead and cold, and I thank God for it. There was a smile on his face. His deep voice broke for the first time as he sat silent for a space, and I did. And so I came away, he resumed presently. I have come to you because he loved you. It was not his wish, but hers, that you should be deceived, made use of. I think she felt it as a kind of justice that she should press you into the service of the cause, as she meant to do from the moment she heard of you. And it was quite easy, since you never suspected that she was not the Fräulein you knew and loved. Hein. She herself, too, had borne the burden so long, had toiled and schemed and suffered for the cause, while this sister had always been shielded, knew nothing, cared nothing for the cause, though indirectly she had suffered somewhat through that mistake on the part of Zelensky's accomplices. Therefore, this sister should give her lover to the cause. That was the thought in her mind. I am sure. She was wrong, but we must not judge her too harshly, my friend. God forbid, I said huskily. All that was over a year ago, and now my task done. I sit at my writing table by a western window and watch the sun, a clear red ball, sink into the Atlantic. We are at Pencarrow, for Antony Pendennis has at last returned to his own house. He is my father-in-law now, for Anne and I were married in the spring, and returned after a long honeymoon to Pencarrow. We found Mishka settled on a farm near, as much at home there as if he had lived in England all his life. He speaks English quite creditably, with a Cornish accent, and I hear that it won't be long before the farm has a mistress, a plump, bright-eyed widow who is going to change her present name of Stiddyford for that of Pavlov. We are quite a family party just now, for Jim and Mary Cayley and the baby, a smart little chap, I'm his godfather, have come down to spend Easter, and Mr. and Mrs. Traherne will drive over from Moran Vicarage, for Mary's matchmaking in that direction panned out exactly as she wished. All is well with us, pleasant and peaceful and homelike, and yet I look at a miniature that lies on the table before me, and my mind drifts back to the unforgettable past. I am far away from Pencarrow, when someone comes behind my chair, a pair of soft hands are laid over my eyes. Dreaming or working, which? Laughs Anne. I take the hands in mine and draw her down till she has her chin on my shoulder, her soft cheek against my face. The dust is falling, but through it she sees the glint of the diamonds on the table and pulls her hand away. You've been thinking of those dreadful days in Russia again, she says, reproachfully, with a queer little catch in her voice. Why don't you forget them altogether, Maurice? Let me put this in the drawer. I hate to look at it, to see you looking at it. She picks up the miniature, gently enough, slips it into a drawer, and turns the key. I know it's horrid of me, darling, but I can't help it, she whispers, kneeling beside me, her fair face upturned, a face crowned more with a wealth of bright hair, which she dresses in a different way now, and I'm glad of that. It makes her look less like her dead sister. I know how she suffered, and I'm not bitter against her, really, she continues rapidly, but when I think of all we had to suffer because of her, I can't quite forgive her, or forget that you loved her once, though you thought you were loving me all the time. I did love you all the time, sweetheart, I assured her, and that is true, but it is true also that I still love that dead woman as I loved her in life, not as I loved Anne, my wife, but as the page loved the queen. I should never tell that to Anne, though. She would not understand. The End. End of chapter 52. Read by LLDM26, Inglewood, June 25th, 2026. End of The Red Symbol by John Ironside.